Oh, there. Oh. All right.
You can borrow that because
That's one?
yeah, that's mine.
Okay.
So go ahead and borrow it. Microphones are on. We are recording right now.
Thank you. Oh, thanks for the heads up.
We're having a few issues
Oh, I see.
still. So, you can see it back there?
Yep. Is it keeping me happy for a little while?
Some light reading.
Also picked up
Robert's Rules of Order, sure. It's important.
Yes, that was.
keep me occupied for next century.
I'm sure there was an abridged version
There
you
is.
probably
Yeah, there is.
could have purchased.
I just went to the library to see what they had. That's what they had.
Yeah, okay.
I said, there's got to be like the pink monkey of Robert's
Definitely.
Rules of Order.
We are recording
Not
right
exactly
now.
like
Give me the spark notes.
Having issues. I poured water down the phone.
Oh, I was wearing a shirt that color. I spilled schmutz on it, and I didn't treat it before I washed it. I know.
Hey, Kate. How are you?
Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome.
I brought one, so I actually might put it back in the fridge.
Did you do that? I'll
just-
take it.
Slide it. I'll
Yeah, I was
slide
about
it
to say, or
right
slide it down this way. I'll try to drink more than one.
over. I was in a meeting,
Thank you.
yes, at 4 o'clock, and I just kept yawning. I couldn't stop yawning. Going, this did not go well.
Does not bode well for that,
This
right?
evening. Oh no. I can't stop yawning. Okay. Go. It's ready. Okay. Just text her. Yes, Deb? Oh, it's Kristen. She's on her way. Hey, Brett.
Hey, how are you?
How you doing? Good.
I'm gonna lower my profile a little bit.
It's a good way for tall guys to kind of.
I know.
Yeah.
Blend in a little bit.
Blend in.
These are the same ones we didn't have
Yes,
last
But
time.
I made the
Well,
correction.
Patrick still wasn't at the meeting, so
Right. Right.
if there was anyone else who wasn't at that meeting, we might still not pass them. I gotta look.
I don't remember. I know I looked at them and I was like, I've read these 3 times now.
Right.
And
Yeah, no, I didn't look at the attendance list for that meeting. So let's see.
What's that? Yep.
We might get Josh one more time. We might get Josh first meeting next month. Because he still lives in Ferndale. Yeah.
right on.
I know, that's what I said. I'll take that. Oh, let me log in first. Let's see. Open network login page.
So Kate,
Yes, sir.
shouldn't probably say this with microphones on.
Well, then
But
walk,
I'm sharing
walk
your-
yourself over.
I'm sharing your quest. First time in 13 years. I found it back. And I
Should
found
I
it
high five
because,
you? I'm high fiving you for joining.
I know, because I found it because Harper told him.
Something special I gotta log into to
She had fit, and I
get
never
internet every time.
Um,
Besides just
But
connecting
still,
to
Ferndale
Ferndale
guest.
guest.
I'm like, what the hell is that? It was, So now I've got the
Oof.
crates, and the snap traps.
So
There we
just
go.
got
You just gotta open the
new
page.
fancy- I will show you.
I
at the
saw
meeting.
the video on Facebook.
Even fancier things
Really?
came. Contraption. Because now Jeff is on the job. So,
I literally declared, wow. That
well, I I invited one of the foreign administrators who was the because I know exactly what and Jeff was, I don't know if he's mad or what, but he was
That's absolutely it.
and I was like, don't you dare, like, criticize me. You're not helping with this.
Yeah.
Like, unless you're doing something. Because, dog, you know, I work in the finance.
See,
I have a dog that died of leptospirosis. This is bad stuff that these
Yeah.
carry.
13 years I've never.
Talking about varmints.
oh, I know. Oh, I know. I've seen you.
Now
I've
I've
seen,
joined the war.
Yes.
I've seen your participation. I'm a silent member.
So there are now new cameras.
I just dribbled.
There are now Wi-Fi cameras.
At your
You got Wi-Fi
At your place?
He got Wi-Fi cameras.
Oh, I thought you did.
So,
Oh,
no,
I-
mine you gotta take the little SIM card out and put it
Okay.
in.
I thought you were just getting jealous and you want to be able to post on there.
No, it began to escalate once I challenged him to get involved or to have someone come over and eliminate them rifle style.
I just want an army of traps.
So Brent wasn't here,
Have you seen those?
so we maybe still
There's a
can't have
Vice.
the minutes.
What did you say?
There's a Vice
Because
media
Patrick and
about
Brent
those
will vote
groups
on
in New York
that.
City that hunt
Yeah.
Yes.
with dogs.
So they might get bumped again, sorry.
No.
We need 6. Yep.
That's what I just confirmed.
So we're not getting both of them. Just
No, they're
just out.
coming, but I've only got 7 here, and Patrick wasn't even on the planning commission then, and Brent wasn't at the meeting.
What did that? What
So
was
1,
that?
2, 3,
Oh,
4,
earlier, a couple minutes ago.
5 with Dan. To pass the minutes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. We're probably gonna have to bump the minutes to the next meeting again.
Sorry.
Don't be sorry. No, it's Brent's fault, it's not your fault.
What I do?
Yeah.
You
on,
you weren't at the
Brent.
meeting on August 15th.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Go back in time. make it to. Weren't you not there?
Because if you
I
could
was
go
there.
back, if you could go back in time, that's the thing you'd do, right?
Yeah,
Go to the
I would
planning
definitely
commission
go to the planning commission meeting.
Yeah. Of all the things.
meeting? Thank you. The clerk has just reminded us that our mics are live, so I
I
should probably
know.
limit my table talk. I apologize. Hi. Okay. Krista is on her way. But I can start with 6, right? Great. Okay, wait, I need one set of notes first. Okay, we will call to order, I don't know which one of these is mine, the City of Ferndale Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, September 19th, 2018 at 6:30 PM. We'll begin with our roll call from the city clerk.
Azar. Brazen.
Here.
Casio.
Here.
Farr. Gurink.
Here.
Williamson. Martin.
Here.
Rock.
Here.
And Baker.
Here, Commissioners Farr and Williamson let us know in advance that they would not be here this evening. Is there a motion to excuse that absence?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. That was a motion by Councilman Martin, I believe, with a second by Commissioner Goring. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Commissioner Azar has texted me. She is on her way, so we will just note when she makes it in, but we do have quorum, so we will begin. We'll move next to approval of our agenda. I look to our city staff. Are there any additions to our agenda this evening or changes? Thank you. Item number 3, the approval of the minutes of the meeting of August 15, 2018. Looking at the minutes and looking at who we have in attendance tonight, I realize that at most we would have 5 votes in favor of passing the minutes. So, City Clerk, I believe we're going to need to move those to our next meeting. Just based on who was absent for that meeting or not yet on Planning Commission. So, moving right along, we will go to call to audience. This is a time for anyone in the audience to address the Planning Commission on any topic of your choice. I ask that you address us on items that are not on the agenda. When we get to an item on the agenda, there will be some time set aside for public comment and questions. So again, this is called audience. Anyone in the audience has 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission. As a reminder on what is coming up on the agenda tonight, we have a conversation coming up it's a rezoning discussion about Drayton Avenue Church, 2441 Pinecrest. There's a site plan review for 2625 Hilton, and then a discussion item about rezoning discussion for 3315 McDowell Street. So if there's anyone who wants to address the Planning Commission on not one of those items. All right. All right, and Commissioner Azar has joined us at 6:36. Welcome. We just got started. We're going to have to bump the minutes again to the next meeting just based on having enough votes who are in attendance. So we'll move to old business, 5A. This is a rezoning discussion. There's no action recommended this evening related to Drayton Church, 2441 Pinecrest. Oh, what did I miss?
Agenda approval?
Did we not approve the agenda? Thank you.
I move we approve the agenda as presented.
I'm going too
Second.
fast. This is what happens when I drink too much Diet Coke. We've had a motion by Councilman Martin with a second by Commissioner Bryson. Thank you, to approve the agenda as presented. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. And thank you for the reminders, Lee Clerk. Going too fast. Okay. Here we go. All right, I made notes. So because we've seen past information on this particular parcel. So here's how we'll run this discussion item this evening. Again, there's no action recommended this evening. This is a discussion item on 2441 Pinecrest, Drayton Church. Our city planner, Justin, will introduce the topic briefly. The applicant will introduce the information that they've shared. And then whether it's Justin or Jordan, I'm not sure, the city will give us some highlights. There was a listening session recently, and I know that the city compiled a list of the top topics that came up at that listening session. So after we get all of that input, then I'd set aside, I'm hoping, 30 minutes or so perhaps for any additional topics that need to be raised, things other than what came up in the listening session, what's already been presented. I want to make sure we get all the topics out on the table, and then we'll have our discussion with the applicant. So, and I'll repeat that as we go through, but we'll start with Justin.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So I'll probably cover off on some of the items that have been talked about by staff and the community and the planning commission throughout this presentation. I may come back up afterward and reiterate some of those things, but essentially just wanted to just talk about where we've been to date, what's happening today and why it's happening, what could happen next, and how people can stay informed throughout the project. Just to make it clear, because this may be some folks' first meetings or first time participating in a rezoning. So far, there has been a development proposal to rezone and update the existing structure at 2441 Drayton Avenue. And that's been through a few different phases, and I'll get through that a little bit more. But so far, there's just been proposals, no action to date. There was a community listening session that was held last week that the development team presented, and some city staff was there taking notes and keeping track of some comments, and you'll see some of those comments reflected here later. And in the midst of all that, also, there's been a few planning commission meetings. So initially, June 6th, there was a discussion. There was no decision made at that meeting, but at the June 6th planning commission meeting, there was just an overall discussion on what is potentially proposed for this site. There was no official site plan at the time. About a month later, on July 11th, that actually should say Planning Commission public hearing. There was a public hearing held for the Planning Commission to consider a rezoning of the site as the project is zoned R1. As many people know, the proposal was to rezone it to R3, which allows for a conversion of the building to allow for multiple family dwellings. So a public hearing was held. There was no action taken at the meeting, but there was a lot of feedback related to the site plan that was provided, and then also feedback related to the conditional rezoning and the conditional rezoning agreement, which basically is a legal document that outlined what, should the project move forward, what would be the parameters, what things would be preserved, what the development timeline would be, how many units would be involved, how many parking spaces would be provided, things like that. So That proposal did not move forward, but, and no action was taken. So it wasn't denied, so if it would have been denied, then that's when a project would have to go back to the Board of Zoning Appeals, which is a different board, and they would have considered the project, but no action was taken at that time. As I mentioned last week, there was a community meeting that my colleague attended and did fill me in on a lot of the feedback that was provided there, and I think it was helpful going forward for the development team and staff to consider. So this is just sort of a visual diagram of what was talked about, not just at that meeting, but at the previous meeting. So this is just this is not going to encompass everything that was been discussed and talked about, but a lot of the concerns and things that we heard from the community that has been participating throughout the process. The larger dots are kind of the things that have been more, I think, talked about, and whereas the other items, the smaller dots, circles that are certainly important topics, but haven't been quite as large of the conversation. So density of the site, what is the appropriate number of units if this were to be rezoned? That has been on a lot of people's mind. Traffic, how will this, if you do allow 30 units there, what will, how will that impact traffic around the site and within the site, and making sure that that's, safe for everyone involved and meets city standards and requirements. Residents being informed and engaged, so a community listening session that was done directly because of the feedback we had heard. And also, something the development team was open to and wanted to do, and we're happy that they led that. We also had already been in the process of this for some of the bigger projects, but we created a project page, and I'll share the link for that for those that haven't heard it. And as always, you can sign in at the back, and we'd have a space for emails if people want to keep informed that way. If the project goes to another step, that's how we will try to keep people informed, aside from the other requirements of mailings and things like that. We heard a little bit about trees and open space. We heard that dot probably should be a little bit bigger for historic preservation. People absolutely, are interested in hearing that portion of, if this project were to move forward and how the existing building would be reused and specifics around that. We heard a little bit about rentals. If this were apartments versus condos, how does that interplay with the existing neighborhood? And then really, does this project meet the rezoning criteria? And that's really what this discussion is about tonight is, not really getting it. You did receive a site plan that was draft in nature and did have some updates from when this project was last seen in July, but really tonight's conversation is primarily to understand if this meets the rezoning criteria and should it move to the next phase. So that's really what today is. So no actions or votes will be taken tonight, but the Planning Commission's role tonight is really to advise developers on whether or not they meet this threshold for rezoning eligibility and criteria. The development team did provide a memo that outlined specifically from the ordinance what the criteria was and answered and provided some detail on that. And they're obviously here to answer any questions related to that if there's more detail needed. But really today is supposed to be a discussion on whether this should move to the next step. So next steps, what would happen or what could happen next? So after tonight, if feedback is that this is a project that should be considered for rezoning but needs some refinement, obviously, to go on to the next required step, a public hearing would be required. Probably, depending on when things are submitted, but that would be, in the October, probably November timeframe. An official rezoning application would be revised and submit. That was what was shared before, but would be updated with an updated site plan that staff would review as we did previously and provided feedback on what changes needed to be made. If the Planning Commission were to recommend that going forward after a public hearing, City Council would then review that rezoning application and hold another public hearing. So City Council is the body that does have a, the final review of this project. Steps 1 and 2 are really just those are not guaranteed, but if a project, I think there were some questions that residents had asked about, if there's incentives in this project or not. If it were to pursue tax incentives as part of this development, then that would probably happen within a year of an approval. And then within 2 years, that's a general timeline of when, permits and construction and timeline for incentives would tie in with that. So those are more of just, estimated timelines. I would say the first two are more of, the necessary steps. This project has not specifically applied for incentives yet, but that was a question that was asked.
Justin, would you clarify, I know that when we have rezonings or special land uses, things that require public hearings, we typically also review a site plan at that same meeting.
Yes.
So I know we had a question from a resident, some correspondence today about site plans in particular. So I know it's not required, but typically you see a site plan at the same time that you see a rezoning request or a special land use request or something.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
even though it doesn't say site plan, that's typically when you see it,
Right, yeah, so that site plan,
when we see it.
yes, we typically recommend that would come as part of the rezoning application. It's just, better for the planning commission and city council to look at that as one full package. So, that would be part of that next step.
Thank you.
Some folks had some questions about what is the role of staff and planning commission in this process. So really, city staff is here to research and review and provide recommendations based on some professional expertise, other projects that have came through the city, and then overall ordinance and master plan guidelines. So staff is really here to make recommendations based on plans that are in front of us, not plans that, are rumored or plans of future buyers that, have been talked about or anything like that. We can only review what's been given to us and submit. So that is what's before us right now and what we've been writing memos and presenting on. So the planning commission, their recommendations are made to city council, as I said. So city council has that final formal approval.
For things like rezoning.
For things like rezonings and special land use. This is a rezoning, so that's where that would come into play. And those do require public hearings, as I mentioned. And then city council really is the ultimate decision maker in the end that would see this rezoning and the legally binding agreement. So how can people stay informed? We do have a city project page that we've been doing for a lot of the larger community projects. So that's the city website there, ferndalemi.gov/projects/2441-Pinecrest. We've also been having an email update list, which we're happy to add anyone to that's interested, and please sign in the back if you would like to be part of that update list. And then if a public hearing was the next step, both at Planning Commission and City Council, this does meet our enhanced notice policy and the city ordinance requirements for public hearings. So anyone that is an occupant or property owner within 500 feet of this parcel would receive a notice of those meetings.
May I, through the chair, I feel compelled to editorialize a bit for the sake of the new members on the planning commission or newer. Yeah, the final decision-making for rezoning lies with city council. But this city council in particular very much values the feedback, not only of the public, but this planning commission as well. So don't think that it's going to council, it's going to be fine. I mean, we very much take the opinions of our planning commission very seriously, so.
Thanks.
So I'm here for more questions if you have them. In the packet, as I mentioned, you did see a letter from the applicant. Applicants here can talk more specifically about that, but also there was a draft site plan, and like I said, the focus of tonight really is more about the discussion. I'm sure some the rezoning criteria discussion. I'm sure there will be some site plan questions that come up, and staff is obviously going to listen to that feedback. But until a full site plan is submitted, this site plan was not, gone through with a fine-tooth comb as an official submittal would.
Right. Well, you didn't have a formal
Right.
site plan submission.
Right.
Thank you. Let's have the applicant give us their update, please.
Welcome.
Hi,
Hi, Peter.
good evening.
have a thumb drive that I was going to work into the system. Thanks, Justin. Perfect. Okay. Laser?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks,
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my name is Peter Stuhlreier with Design House Architecture, representing the development team on the project. And we're here tonight, as you stated, for a discussion with Planning Commission. We met with several members of the neighborhood in the last couple of weeks to discuss some of the issues. And tonight, I think the four main topics we're going to cover, that I'd like to cover with the group, are basically our goal. Our ultimate goal is to meet with the Planning Commission for a rezoning and site plan in November. So between now and then, depending on the outcome of this evening, we'll regroup as a team and put together a full site plan submittal along with a conditional rezone and list of conditions for that particular meeting. That will be submitted in October, I think mid to late October, for the review of administration and staff. The second item is density and how that might relate to traffic. So our objective is to get a conditional rezone for a maximum of 30 units, 30 rental units. This is based on our extensive analysis of the project and the site plan and the available parking field, as well as the building infrastructure itself. I'm joined tonight to discuss that further, if the questions come up, by Julie with the traffic engineering company, Fleece Vandenbrink. I don't want to mess up that name. I have a hard enough name myself. The third thing we want to discuss is tax incentives, if they're applied for, how they impact the income levels for the rental units and what the density thresholds are for those. And I'm joined by another member of the development team, Ed Siegel, to discuss any of that that may arise. The fourth thing is more in my court, and those are some of the realities, although still materializing, because we haven't produced a site plan, a full site plan to your standards, but to discuss some of the things that we think are really going to happen to this site and building, the things that are physical changes and realities to the adaptive reuse of this building to an apartment building. And I think that was a topic that came up during our neighborhood discussion a little while ago. And now, although we're not really prepared to get into the deep granular details, we are able to converse about many of the things that are going to change and many of the things that are not going to change. So those are the four main items that I'd like to talk about. And interrupt me whenever, because a discussion.
I will totally interrupt you here.
Perfect.
You know that by now.
So, first and foremost, the site plan. The site plan is shown here on the board, and the footprint of the building is shown unchanged. In the parking lot, we're proposing reducing the amount of asphalt and adding single-level brick interior garages surrounding the parking lot, creating, in most cases, not in every case of the garage, creating a separation between the rear of the lots around us and our parking lot. To us, this is a benefit to the neighbors because it not only leaves a large buffer of trees and landscape between the garage and the neighbors, but it also provides a brick wall to block the view of the parking field. So in essence, it's reasonably benign when it comes to the back edges of the property and the moving traffic throughout the site, which we don't think will be in great deal. So this is the site plan where you can see the garages that we've drawn now. This is subject to the discussion tonight. It's subject to change between now and the October submittal, but we're looking at single-level, low garages built of the same brick and the same architectural featuring as the church compound itself.
And when you say garage, it would have a door?
Oh, yeah, garage doors, yes.
Got it, thank you.
Yes. Interior garages.
Thank you.
Again, we are attempting to attract on the higher end of the market for rent rates, and one of those things that's going to help that is an interior garage for everyone.
Thank you.
This is a rendering of the front of the church, and you can see, and I'll point my arrow, my laser beam. If I hit you right in the eye, tell me. This is facing north. You can see the stained glass has been replaced by more conventional residential windows, but in keeping with the windows on the rest of the building. So the building will be uniform. You can see that the lower spaces have windows facing north as well, but in order to give them better light and bigger windows, we're proposing a small window well area. This is only on the north face. This does not occur on the south face of the main sanctuary. Now there's a proper view. This is a basic floor plan that shows the circulation pattern being adapted but left basically intact from the building itself. It shows the blue would be where apartment units go, the pink is where hallways go, and the yellow are other features such as mechanical, electrical areas, shafts, elevators, and so on and so forth. But you can get a pretty good feel of how the building gets adapted from that diagram. And there's you have an upper level. I'll come back to that slide. This is one of the major changes to the facility, and I want to bring this to everybody's attention. This hasn't come up in slide format, but as you can see on the north face only of the sanctuary roof, we will be proposing cut-in dormer balconies. These are in rhythm with what I call that lumber, with the heavy timber framing. So the heavy timber framing will be the thing that divides each of the units, and then the units will have an upper level and a lower level, and the upper level will have a small balcony and window. So that gives you a feel for one of the most major changes to the project in the slate roof.
If I may, through the chair, have you thought about what you'll do with those stained glass?
Have not. Have not. Donation is the most likely.
Or there may be just a suggestion, artistic reuse on the property? Just a suggestion.
True. And that is a possibility. And then I think that the next 30 or 40 days are really getting into those kind of details.
Sure.
This is the other major change, where the lower level gets better light and windows through the use of a well, which is in the courtyard of the compound. You can see a fence around it. These are some examples of, and these are very rudimentary examples, but they're examples of the replacement of non-thermal glazing and or stained glass glazing with more residential windows, but in the same openings. So you can see that the windows that we must replace, we can replace in kind. The ones that can't work thermally or mechanically to our liking, or that are stained glass, we can also have windows made or bought that reflect a more residential use. In some cases, you see old storefront. There's several types of windows in the building. We want to bring them all to a uniform style of window, but these are examples of different portions of the building and how they might look if they were replaced. We talk about the corner, the northeast corner of the property being more or less designated to use of the public. I know that the public probably uses it anyway, but this is something we could do to amplify and welcome neighborhood use of that open lawn area. We have another change to the building that we'll be proposing. This is a section of the building that stops right about there underneath these windows. Our proposal, this is in the back, it's kind of a modern addition, it's where the kitchen is. It's got a flat roof, and in order to accommodate additional elevator and stair areas from grade, we discussed adding a level on top of that box, and I don't know, when I go back to the site plan, I can be more specific of where this portion is. It's obviously much shorter than the majority of the church, but it's still an addition, and it goes up.
So rather than like an external elevator shaft, it would be internal to the building?
Yeah.
But inside an addition?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
And there's only one entrance into the building that is on grade, which is right there at the parking lot. So it's our only accessible area that we can have the elevator landing occur. There is the old sanctuary on the very north of the building, which has a low pitch roof that leads up to a flat roof. We will be proposing some architectural dormers in that roof itself. You can see behind me where the cutout dormers are. Here is the window well, and this roof are some cutout dormers. Again, I don't think that violates the idea of residential scale. It might pull it away a little bit from this institutional scale that it's at now. It might actually help. It's a low pitch roof. It's not the highlight of the building, but it is great space to allow some light from higher up to enter. So I think I brought up 4 changes to the property plus the garages. So there's 5. You have garages, the cutout dormers, the built-on dormers, the window well, and the additional height over top of the kitchen and lobby that are in the back. And I'll go back to that site plan so that I can demonstrate where that is. So the additional area that we're adding height to is in the back corner right there, those 2 walls.
Behind Jeff's garage?
Right, which is still.
That's not on the site plan.
Which is still 20. Right, that's not there, except that you notice we did stripe off all these parking spaces to
Yes.
make sure that we did not impede access to the garage.
Thank you.
And when we have the surveys completed, we'll make a note of that. But that little section that wraps around the back gable, it goes from there, kind of underneath the lettering like that, would be elevated over the kitchen. So those are my 4 points of what the architecture is going to do differently than it does today. And there was some discussion during the neighborhood meeting that we needed to bring reality to it. We're not intending on changing the footprint. Other than the garages, we don't think the garages negatively impact their associated adjacencies. So And the windows, obviously, trying to bring them all to the same standard. It'll be a dark bronze, black, dark gray, or brown window with the same gauge mutton bars throughout the church, throughout all of the windows, which will coordinate in a more residential feel. So that's, and I don't know if I count that one, because there's already about 5 different types of windows in here, and not very many of them are significant, and the significant ones we can't keep because they're stained glass. So those are our points. But the ones we're replacing will look like they belong to a 70-year-old building.
Through the chair, but you'll need egress windows in the units. Are you adding windows?
Technically, in this building type, the egress windows are not required,
Okay.
but they will be all operable in rooms or bedrooms or living rooms. So, but it's because we have 2 or more means of egress from each unit, and we're shorter than 3 stories in most cases. We're not more than 3 stories. We can have bedrooms that maybe don't have full egress. So if we get caught in a pinch where we have a narrow spot for a replacement window, we won't be held to the egress window.
So all of the
Law.
existing church windows would remain, and there are no new punched-in windows that you would
Yeah, we're
need?
not going to change openings. We're just going to take out the glass. We're either taking it out because it's too commercial looking, because it's not insulated, or because it's stained glass.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. So I want to make sure that we've got some time. I'm going to take a look at the time. It's just a little after 7. I want to make sure that we've got time to take some questions and comments for the public. I'll just reiterate things that are already on our list. So I definitely want to make sure we hear if there are things that are missing from this list. Neighborhood impact, and I imagine a number of the things on the rest of the list touch that. Trees, preservation of trees, addition of trees, traffic and circulation, density and number of units, infrastructure and sort of supporting information around infrastructure demands, preservation of the building, including questions around windows and slate, questions about rental versus ownership, questions around the rezoning criteria and the compliance to those. There was a question as well from a neighbor about snow removal. I guess that kind of falls under traffic and circulation. There were 2 questions from neighbors about parking and how much will be internal to the site versus green space that might be added. And then I had a question about property maintenance and if there's, a storage building or if that's internal to the building. But that's the list so far based on what Justin shared, some emails that we've seen from neighbors. So if we've got neighbors who are here to speak on the subject, it's not a public hearing, but I want to make sure that in particular, if we've got anything that's not on this list that needs to be added, please come on up. So this is your time. If we've got neighbors who are here to speak on Drayton Avenue Church.
Can I comment on the snow? I mean,
Oh, sure, yep.
we're just so that we get a clear picture. Our coverage area of buildings versus non-covered area is more than adequate for the removal of snow and the storage and stockpiling of it. Here, there. So we're not struggling on that.
Shoving it into the
we're not
streets
pushing
and
it,
into
no.
someone's
We're not
driveway.
having to haul it off in trailers.
Or just kind of pushing it out onto Drayton or out onto Maplehurst. I think that those were some of the questions we were getting was sometimes a business will just kind of shove their snow and leave it in front of someone's driveway.
We could bring flamethroers and melt it, whichever.
Thanks, Peter. We'll come back. That's more of a site plan question anyway, but.
Okay.
Alrighty, thank you. All right, let's take, half an hour or so, or if we even need that much, but let's see if we've got neighbors who'd like to share tonight. Welcome.
Hi, Jeff Benson, 655 West Woodland. This is the first time we saw the picture of the building with the changes. they said he pointed out some of the changes, but where the sanctuary is and the sliding glass doors or balcony are going to be put, that's going to make a pretty significant change to the building too, because it doesn't look like they'd be able to keep the slate roof or any of that either.
I've got a definite question for them around
Okay.
slate roof. Thank you. That's a really good question. You are not the only neighbor to ask that one. Oh, look, Jeff follows Jeff. Welcome.
Nahan, 2345 Pinecrest. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. I just needed a little clarification from you, Peter, in regards to the south side of the church, in terms of the window treatments there. You had mentioned earlier in another discussion that the egress hallways for both the upper and the lower level would be on the south side, but as you flip through the diagrams, that's what I thought. I thought it was an old slide. And then the other question was, given that it is an egress hallway, are you considering the possibility, given the architecture and the stained glass on that side, to maintain that section of stained glass on the south side? Happy to do that. Wow, that's so agreeable. I have other questions later regarding some traffic concerns now that school's back in session that I've noticed, based on the backup on Pinecrest all the way to Maplehurst as people try to pick up their children. It's a little bit daunting. There is also a note here on the alley, and this was mentioned, Peter, at the community meeting, that the north side of the building would be an in and out entrance off of Drayton. And Peter, or perhaps it was Gall, mentioned that the Maplehurst side would be an exit only. Given that's a public alley, I don't know how you make that exit only. And also given that the person, the first house in from the alley on West Maplehurst has a driveway, I would think that Mr. Riley is the owner's name, might want to be able to come in and out of that short distance there. But I'll have more questions later. Thank you, Peter.
Welcome, Becky.
Hi, I'm Becky Hammond. I live on West Drayton, a little bit west of the church. I'm having a little bit of feeling of Groundhog Day here because when we did the July 11th meeting, a major American newspaper, the Detroit Free Press, reported that residents of Ferndale had won our battle against rezoning, and this has an odd, just starting all over again feeling. So what I'm wondering, after those two hugely attended meetings, which we were just about 100%, the dozens of people who showed up, opposed to rezoning, those comments are all cataloged, right? There's a record of everybody's, okay, good. So in the letter that's online, Design House is quoted as saying, "We feel this will be a great benefit to the community and will preserve a significant piece of architecture." That comment to me is very tone deaf because the community showed up and said all the dozens of reasons we think this is no benefit to our community, and there are a lot of them. And the preserving the significant piece of architecture seemed a far-fetched idea to me before because the building was going to be gutted, but when I see the plans now, I'm not sure how anyone is calling this historic preservation. It's not really going to look much like the same church. All right, I think that's all I got for now.
Thank you. So now Becky's the second person to say either for now or I'm coming back with more. But if you've got more, bring, because I want to make sure that we get through conversations without sort of like a 3-hour back and forth every single time we see this. So come on back. If you've got more, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm Jeff Nahan, 2345.
I know you had a neighbor.
At 2345 Pinecrest.
Yep.
However, at this particular moment, I'm speaking for.
Are you Mrs. Mason?
Oh. Yes, it's here. 1 second. Yes, 2505 Pinecrest.
Thank you.
Homeowners Margaret Mason and Roger Webb.
Thank you.
I read for them as a proxy.
Dramatic reading. Thank you.
Not so. We appreciate the opportunity to have input and that the developer has taken some steps to address concerns previously raised. We do feel some additional adjustments to the plan are needed, in particular, the number of units. We are in support of conditional rezoning for a plan that would result in no greater population density than would be likely with 12 to 14 single-family homes, which is a high-end estimate for the number of homes that could be built on the property. Assuming an average of 3 people per home and/or 2 people per apartment, the appropriate number of units would be about 21, which result in approximately 42 new residents. In addition, and I continue to read from her letter, the plan should allow for adequate on-site parking to prevent overflow street parking. 2.5 parking spaces per unit would seem to be the minimum to allow for adequate visitor parking and plowed snowbanks in the winter. While additional green space could be desirable, the priority should be ample parking. Some type of internal community or communal space would be highly preferable. Any changes to the external appearance of the building, particularly windows, should be fully in keeping with the time period and architecture of the building. In summary, we, meaning Roger and Margaret, support conditional rezoning for installation of apartments housing the same number of people that would be added if 12 to 14 houses were built, which we estimate to be no more than 21 units. Thank you.
Thank you. I knew he had that. She emailed earlier.
Right.
Yeah.
Hi, good
Welcome.
evening. Welcome. Thank you. My name's John Proietti. I'm at 671 West Drayton Street. I had a couple questions. I'm interested in in the parking lot, is that going to be covered, or is the garages going to be, because you have garages, you don't need the coverings? I'm also interested in the lighting scheme in the parking area and out front.
Okay.
What type of lighting? Is it going to be like a low sodium or something that's going to, not be blinding the neighbors, especially on the back there? The other thing I didn't notice in the site plan is dumpster locations and the number of dumpsters. Where are they going to be located? Because when they do pickups in the morning, could be kind of disturbing. I also noticed when Peter was showing the site plan, he had steps up the front, kind of where the current steps are. Is that an entrance? Because I thought he said the only entrance was in the back.
Okay.
But where does that go, those steps? Does it just go to a wall, blank wall, or is he filling in that entryway? I guess based on the quick picture, kind of concerned of what he's kind of doing in that area there.
I wondered about both of those main sets of doors.
Yeah, that whole area,
Okay.
current front entry there of the church, so.
Got it.
Okay, that's all.
Thanks,
Thank
John. Thank you. All right. Anyone else? Welcome, come on up.
Rich Kennedy, 747 West Oak Ridge. Because this building is between me and the water pumping system,
Yes.
among other things, I'm really concerned about density myself. And I'd like to reiterate the notion of about, a maximum of 20 to 24 units, just to control the use and the traffic. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Hi.
I meant to ask, am I right that the last meeting about this is the night before Thanksgiving? The last planning commission meeting is the night before Thanksgiving?
We don't, typically if we have a planning commission meeting that comes that close to a holiday, it gets moved.
Okay.
Because often we won't be able to get quorum because people are traveling and stuff.
Okay. And then I'd just like to say I've now heard only one comment of all the dozens of comments I've heard in favor of rezoning, but only if there's a greatly smaller number of apartments. And I know the developers have already said that they will not go below 30. Last week they did.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Gretchen Benson, 655 West Woodland. I just have a couple questions. One is about the steeple and the cross at the top of the steeple.
Okay.
And is that staying? And are there any regulations about it then being considered a religious dwelling apartment? Are there, any issues with that? That's going to be quite a big change to the building as well.
Oh.
My other comment or question would be about the sewers and the plumbing and the water pressure. That was brought up back in, I think it's the July meeting, and we haven't heard anything addressed about that. That's a serious issue already in the area, let alone if we bring in 30 units.
Right.
So that's an issue. And then I just, wanted to state that I still haven't heard any benefit to me as an immediate resident. We already have a green space that's there that we can use now. I don't consider this little teeny area that he pointed out a benefit to me. And that little thing certainly doesn't outweigh all these other negatives. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions, comments? Any other points that we should get clarification on from the applicant?
I know, Peter, this is going.
That was a good one. Hi, John.
The detail about stained glass, in particular, we're curious about the front of the building.
Yep,
And the
rose
big
window.
circular, I'll call it, for lack of a better word, Rosetta Stone style
Yep.
stained glass, and the historic and particularly interesting character of that, and how that potentially might stay. Also on the south side, in the sense, I already asked that question about that stained glass, but also I echo the concerns about the steps, and is that an entrance, and also the lighting. Because the lighting is going to be a great effect on everyone, particularly those that are less than 10 feet away.
Thank you. That was Jeff Nahan on Pinecrest, those last comments.
Well, we'll expect to see a treatment of the south side facing the 2, 3, 4, 5 Pinecrest at no change.
Except the piece over the kitchen.
Except the piece over the kitchen. Lower window stay the same? Okay, thank you.
I'll make sure the applicant clarifies questions about windows, about stained glass, new ingress or egress doors, or what happens with existing doors. Yep. Come on up, Peter. Yeah, I don't see anyone else coming up, so.
Until the last one. We've talked about the steeple. That's an interesting perspective. And we also talked about the bells. So let us get to the point where we can put our pieces together for the submittal.
I'm sorry, the steeple and the what? What was the other
The
one?
steeple, the cross, the bells.
Oh, the bells. I'm
There's
sorry.
lots of
Thank you.
little things.
Organ?
The organ.
Oh, organ's gone. Thank you.
Go on. Okay. At the end of the day, these entrances are all still entrances. Each entrance that's into the building are still entrances into the building. And we're not changing the flow. You're not going to get in. They're fob keys, but they're entrances. The slate roof people have already been there to discuss the strategy and the condition of the slate roof and what needs to be done to it. It happens to be in very good condition.
Yeah, they just put a lot of money into it a couple years ago.
Yeah, so that was a big part of, being still here.
Great to hear.
The stained glass, Jeff, we're happy to keep the stained glass on the south, down the corridor. I think that'll be a beautiful thing. We have to, when we discuss this with everyone, this is not historic preservation. This is adaptive reuse with an eye towards being sensitive, but it is not historic preservation. It's not a historic property, but it is, the objective is to maintain the character of the site, the character of the neighborhood, and all of the mature trees. So those things alone, we think are one of the primary, if not the primary benefit to the community. Number of units, we can get to that in a second. Parking, we're over-parked by the code and by the standards that my firm applies to multifamily housing by, I think, 12 spaces. So in terms of guests and things like that, we should not see any kind of overflow parking on streets and whatnot, as you would see if it was single-family, a single-family development. Lighting is a particular concern of mine as well. Of course, you have laws regarding lighting, and those have to be conformed to and proven during the next follow-up hearing in November. And I don't like green or eerie lighting, so this will be a much more residential feeling than the high-pressure or low-pressure sodium, or this will be the temperature corrected to something that's very comfortable and nice. We'll address the dumpster in the future. Where else am I going to go with? Okay, so just to talk about Roger's concerns, and I know that, oh, I don't want to push the wrong button here. I do have a chart for Roger and for anyone that's in the density discussion.
Roger.
Because we have gone through this density.
Oh, I was going to say Rich is here. Got it. Thank you.
So we got together with our civil engineer and did a layout for R1, 4,000 square foot, 40 foot minimum frontage across the site, and the property will be able to have 19 single-family homes. That question was asked the last time we got together, and they wanted to know. I wanted to know what is the alternative. We look at those things and we talk about the coverages and the coverages that we have today, the gross building areas, impervious surfaces, and I want everybody to kind of really get a feel for this data. I know this seems like this is some sort of benefit to a developer because it's it's multifamily and residential, but the reality is rezoning this back to, or just knocking this building down and going back to R1 or R1 use, you're looking at an increase of building coverage, you're looking at an increase of gross building area, an increase of impervious surface, you're looking at an increase of population, an increase of bedrooms, and an enormous increase of curb cuts along not only the existing streets, but the new street that would be involved in the parceling of the project. So it's not more disruptive in terms of the project that we're proposing. It's far, far less disruptive to utilities, construction time, runoff, drainage, population. So we need to make that clear, and we can bring that secondary subordinate site plan to the next as a piece of evidence to the next proposal or to the next submittal. But
through the chair, that's a great chart. Would you mind? You said you'd share it. Can we get it, Justin, and give it to the planning commissioners or whoever else wants it? Thank you.
But these are 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, a 21 or 2,200 square foot house on a 4,000 square foot lot with a 2-car garage, driveway, patio, porch. Not that that's not a beautiful thing and can't be done well, but it's certainly the argument that one is the less disruptive and one is the more disruptive is a false argument. The conversion of this to an apartment building is the less disruptive of the two options. So that's all I got.
All righty. Those are different, I appreciate the information that you guys have presented. Those are different numbers than some of the numbers that our city planning team has put forward as practical. And those are the numbers that Ms. Mason and Mr. Webb were working with when they said the 12 to 14 single-family homes. So I appreciate the comparison and the layout and site planning that you put into that. Okay. We get just check in sort of with my commissioners. We can either do this sort of the way that we do public hearings and just kind of run through the list, or we can kind of go down the table, and I have a feeling we'll get to many of the things that are on the list, and kind of come back to anything that we missed. Is there a preference?
I feel like the list is pretty comprehensive. I mean.
Start there?
But however everybody else feels, I mean.
Okay. We'll start there. So, all right, we got some questions, Peter. Ready? I'm ready. Come on up. You mentioned that your interest was in preserving the mature trees on the site. So I'm sure that there will be some type of assessment of health, or what I don't want you to do is overpromise and say you can keep every tree on the site if you have a tree that is not well, that needs to come down. So your intent would be perhaps to keep all of the mature trees on the site that are in savable condition.
That's
Yes.
correct.
Okay, I wanted to make sure I heard that right, but I didn't want you to say all if you had something that was unsafe for need to come in.
We want the nature of this
Site.
parcel to be maintained.
Got it. In terms of addition of trees or green space, that's mostly focused in the parking lot area right now, yes? Other than some of the landscaping.
I don't think we have a fully compiled landscape strategy.
Okay.
That would coincide with the close-in areas of the building, the entrances and so forth. You don't have a full landscape plan? No,
Oh, I
it's-
didn't expect a full
Yeah,
landscape.
so, but we will, but that'll
Sure.
come with, there obviously will be additional landscaping.
So thinking about the green space that has been proposed in what is now just a sort of fully blacktop parking area, on the west side of the building. We've got some pros and cons to think about as a commission. So one of my questions to you guys, my colleagues, is the trade-off between greening a parking lot versus adding more parking spaces. When the most recent equivalent that I can think of to this conversation was the Taft site plan, where we really pushed to get their resident parking needs contained within the site. And we pushed, if I remember correctly, as close as possible, as hard as possible as we could to get to that R1 parking standard, which is 2 cars per residential unit. Are there thoughts about sort of the trade-off between more green space in a parking lot versus more parking spaces in a parking lot from commissioners? Because we've seen sort of 2 different iterations of a parking lot.
I have a quick question, a point of clarification. In our packet here for tonight, we have a draft revised site plan that actually has the garages pulled towards the center and a little bit extra green space around the perimeter. So none of the garages are near the parcel boundary to the south, and then in the middle there, they've actually been pulled to the middle. So I was wondering, is there truly a draft revised site plan, or is this, as depicted, the most updated one? Because this is what we, I believe we reviewed in July.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll reserve the finalization of our strategy with your comments and get together with administration and put together what the best solution is based on the concerns.
Okay, I just was wondering if the one that was in our packet as a draft revised site plan was some, representative of some steps that had been taken.
We're going every direction all day until we submit in October, looking for different strategies, looking for different scenarios. So you probably have one of those scenarios that popped up.
Okay.
Group 2. Parking, circulation, drainage. So I asked Justin, I said, based on the addition of these garages, these structures, does that mean that there needs to be a full revamping of stormwater detention and or retention. And he said, no, it needs to be, what would come off the new structures needs to be dealt with, but we wouldn't necessarily be reviewing, sort of a giant engineering plan. So thinking about runoff problems already in the area versus parking load. These are some of the things I'm looking for in direction. People feel strongly one way or another. I guess my preference is to contain as many cars internal to the site as possible and get to that R2 standard. It obviously does mean that you're overparked to the R1 standard. It would mean you're overparked for an R2 or an R3, but given the neighborhood that you're in, and the fact that you may lose some based on where alleys and other sort of city egress things kind of cross this funny parking lot, containing things inside would be my preference.
I'd be open to that, I would say. I do worry about a sea of concrete.
There's already one there.
Right? And it's not pretty. And so when we talk about improved, public presence, but I think considering the character of the neighborhood, I would entertain that. What your preference is?
Patrick, did you?
I'm a resident on Drayton, 631 Drayton, so I live about 5 doors down. Personally, I would concur, as I would feel my neighbors would, that any additional demand on site or street parking, would not be welcome. It's if you have one project on the street, the demand is already full. Does that combat with my issues with green space? I think so.
I know that's where the trade-off, right?
Balancing act.
It goes against intuition to say.
Sorry, I led with a hard one,
but.
A little bit of a hard one, but it's a big one, and it leads into a lot of the other
Mr. Rock?
Oh,
sure.
Sorry, so we can hear your words, thank you.
Just to reiterate, I would concur that keeping parking on site would be preferable and not pushing parking out into the street, but that combats our intentions to have more green space.
I agree. Commissioner Azar? Okay. Commissioner Greg?
I think I'd fall somewhere in between. It being an R3 outside of a typical R3 location, I can see the point there. Is there street parking on both sides for both Maplehurst and Drayton, or is it one side street parking?
It's both sides of Maplehurst.
On Maplehurst, one side on Drayton.
One side on Drayton.
Yeah, so then one of the streets with just one side parking. I think that's
fire
another
lane.
consideration there. I'm struggling to kind of respond to the trade-off right now just because I was looking at this as an assumption that it had moved towards this other site plan that is in our packet that was prepared for this evening. As a draft, obviously not a final site plan. I think somewhere in between the two makes sense, just like I said, because it's R3 outside of a typical R3 location. But I think this is a greatly improved parking and circulation site plan from the last, based on some of the spacing away from the neighboring properties.
In terms of circulation, there was a question about whether or not an exit-only option was available on Maplehurst. I see Justin shaking his, oh, I'm sorry. Peter, I didn't see you.
No,
Do you have something to add on parking?
I think that the exit idea would be handled internally by management because obviously we have an easement for the residents to come and go. So it would simply be, don't pull in that way. I mean, I think it's a discussion with administration and with traffic, and is it an in only for residents? Is it an out only for residents? Which is going to work better for the neighbors? Is it not used by us?
Right.
I don't think, I don't know. I don't know those answers. And Julie's here. She could respond to that or study that issue as we get further down. Maybe the neighbors want to comment on whether that south exit should be, or entrance should be used at all, or whether it would help. And I know that there's been some issues with traffic.
Yeah, I mean, I can share the concern of the neighbor that's the second door down, and then as the neighbor who used to be the second door down on the other side of the street, the concern at Maplehurst is always visibility. There's sort of a short driveway at that garage, at the Pinecrest address. So you've often got cars parked on the street and kind of parked in that driveway overhanging the sidewalk. So just visibility as you cross the sidewalk, as you pull out onto Maplehurst. And that's the concern that I've heard from Katie Hirschberger. That's the sort of the question, if you will, that I would raise, having been a former neighbor right there. But Justin, have you got something to add about circulation?
Just briefly, we can talk about it going forward, but it is a public, right-of-way right now because of the access for those garages there, so we'd want to keep that intact. So, we could look at some options, but at least from right now, I think the city would be interested in keeping that available as two-way for the residents that use it back there. But we can talk about it going forward. We'll bring that to the next, if there's a future meeting, we'll bring that.
If this project proceeds, our residents will have the choice we give them. So it's not an issue for us. I mean, if that's their exit and entrance, that's their exit and entrance.
Okay. This might be.
Pardon?
How would you enforce that?
If
people are allowed to come and go either way because they own those driveways, how would you keep residents of the apartment building from coming and going if anybody can come and go?
with good management techniques,
What would they be?
signage, signatures.
This might also be a good time for, you said you've got someone who's a traffic engineer or who did that.
Yes.
I don't want to call it a traffic study because it wasn't a traffic study, but who did some of those counts and estimates that we saw before. This might be a good time to have her share some of the background about those numbers.
Julie, you want to come up?
It was a head scratcher for a lot of neighbors when it was sort of asserted that, like, wow, you could generate this many trips from that church, because we've known that church to be a small neighborhood church or two in a large building for a long time. So I guess if you would talk a little bit about what the figures that you generated are based on, and how, just some background on how traffic estimates are generated.
Sure. My name, again, is Julie Kroll. I'm with Place and Vandenbrink.
Thank you.
And I did receive the letter from Giffords Webster that they did back in July that addressed some of the comments. So since then, I did revise some of my numbers. They had some questions about how we did the analysis. So what I have done is revise this, and we're not even close to, because as like you said, we're still in concept phase. So, but I did prepare some additional numbers for tonight. If I can bring them up, if you like, and we can talk through them, that might be helpful.
Sure.
So when I did it the first time, I was provided a square footage for the church, and we based the analysis on the trip generation for square footage. And the comment that came back was we should use the number of seats in the church.
Okay.
So, and that was the comment in the Giffords Webster letter, was to evaluate the existing church based on the number of seats. So that's what you're seeing in front of you, is a revised trip generation analysis for the existing church based on number of seats. And essentially it cut it in half. And then I still evaluated the multifamily based on number of units, which is 30. So that didn't change from before. So this is, so you can kind of see for comparable, the church, now this is assuming, it's a not your tiny neighborhood church, but, it was maybe back in the day, people went to church more. So what they're experiencing now isn't every, what they had before as this smaller church wasn't necessarily what it was designed for. So in theory, it could hold 446 seats. That was what the church was designed for. So when we compare that to what is generated on a daily basis by 30 units, they're actually quite comparable on a weekday basis, because you really only have a few staff, people coming in and out during the weekday, especially in the morning and afternoons during the peak hour. They're very, very comparable. It's just when we get to the Saturdays and Sundays that you can see that the church generates far more traffic on the weekends. That is per usual, but with the apartment complex, it's pretty much the same 7 days a week.
Thank you. Does that include, and you may not know the answer to this, but there are 2 chapels in this church. There were 2 congregations functioning out of it. Do you know if both of those sites were in your seat count?
I don't know for sure.
That's okay.
This was just the number of seats
all right.
that I was provided for this church.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. Other questions up here for the traffic?
Does this include any kind of school use or daycare use?
No.
or-
no, this would just be a church use. So what you're seeing, like during the weekday, you can see in the morning, it looks like 2 people came to work in the morning to work at this church in the office, presumably, that sort of thing. And then in the afternoon, they left. So it basically during the day operates like you would expect a church to operate with an office or small office, and not a school. The school would be a different land use on top of the church.
I think too, and I don't know if you captured this or not, I mean, this church here was very socially engaged in that there were a large number of large support groups that would meet there during the week, and Boy Scouts and other community groups. So there are evenings that church is quite active and the parking lot's full during the week.
Yes, so the data that it was based on typical operations of a church. So, the evening, so we were just looking at in the morning, like between 7 and 9 in the morning and 4 and 6 in the afternoon. So a lot of those, like Boy Scout activities, those happen, in the evenings, and they're not reflected here.
Okay.
But that's certainly something that, if the commission would like to see in an analysis, we can certainly include that.
I think it's an important part of the conversation, because you could have easily 150 people in that building in support groups and scouting or whatever on an evening, and that makes a difference on what that traffic and parking looks like.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Any questions? Thanks, Julie. We may have more, but
Sure.
Thank you. This is a tough one, and it's been tough for Pleasant Ridge and for Ferndale. And Justin, I know that you were just out there talking with the superintendent and other people about it, but traffic backups at the school. I'm not asking you to have a solution. I'm just saying that, should this conversation move forward, I think that's going to be a very important consideration when it comes to site circulation. And that may come back to the conversation about, is there an exit that's not onto Drayton?
If I may, through the chair, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I don't think we can ignore it. I think, and I'm unfamiliar with, what is the greater root cause conversation with the school, though? Because it's a mess today without residential.
They're working on it with the school. I'm not trying to put Justin on the spot to come up with a
No,
solution.
okay.
But
I just don't know what it is, so I didn't even know you were working with the school, so that's
Yeah,
good to know, because it is a problem today
it's
without
that
this.
people drive to school instead of walk to school. It's the greater.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean,
That's the primary issue, right? So, and Kate's right, there's not a solution for me tonight, but a few weeks ago, Ferndale Police, Pleasant Ridge Police, myself, and Pleasant Ridge City Manager and the Superintendent of Schools all got together, kind of, to assess what's going on there. There was a study done by the Traffic Improvement Association a few years ago, TIA, so that's being reevaluated too. So I think you'll probably hear more about that in the coming weeks on, if there is something that can be changed, if there's any other configurations in the parking lot that could be better suited for drop-off, but we're just not there yet, so.
Yeah, it's important to have it in this context, in this discussion, but I don't think this development is going to fix that. There's another problem there that's gotta be fixed.
Correct,
Yeah.
right.
thanks, Justin. I'm going to move to density and number of units. If we're ready. Peter, remind me, what was the unit number or range that we were talking about earlier in the summer, and has it changed substantially?
No, I think our discussion has been 24 to 30.
Okay. Talk to me about 24.
24, 30 is 30, and the reality of that number, is probably traffic-based. And I think Julie should comment on what 6 units looks like in terms of data on cars. And really, that 6 units might be the make or break for the financials. It might be, it might not be. And I think Jordan addressed this many times, but the rezoning, the idea that the building could be reused, saved, adaptively reused along with the site, is a bigger deal than how many units I can plug in, whether they're 1,200 or 1,100 square feet, or whether there's 24 that are 1,300 or 30 that are 1,000. That kind of time is thrown out the window if we can't have a conversation with the neighborhood to persuade them that the site itself, the building itself, the character of it is more important than throwing it out for the R1 zoning. And if we can persuade them that, then we can study. We know that we can't get more than 30 by square foot. We know that 24 is a number. I mean, 24 is a number that has been brought up because of the zoning, whatever, 12 per acre or something. But we know 24 is an easy fit. We're not sure if 30 is perfect. But we know that we don't want to come in and say, we'll just do, 12. It doesn't, you can just do the math on the fine. It doesn't make sense, but.
Does it change if it's a for sale product versus a for rent product, or is for sale just not in the mix?
It's not really in the mix. I mean, it's this particular development company's idea is to hold properties basically forever and maintain them, manage them, and own them as assets. So they're not really in the market to condo it out and walk away. And I don't think that's a major deal. I think that the rent rates and what we're seeing in the marketplace will support rental versus ownership. But the number, we really have to address that if we're going to talk about 6 units between the two groups, we need to discuss what that really means and what that's for. Is it to make it so that the financials are just at the edge and then we're vacant or we're not taking care of the building or whatever, but it's less units, or we get more units and the project is more robust and works better in trade of, a 0.25 second delay at the corner of Woodward and, Drayton when you're pulling out. So that's the kind of thing we need the traffic study to show the impact between 24 and 30.
Is there, I know that in the building here at Ferndale House downtown, so different neighborhood, obviously, that there is a mixture of uses integrated. Has there been any thought about something other than residential being integrated here?
There has been discussion of the lower level underneath the main sanctuary of an assembly space managed by the apartment management company that would be available to the general public.
So for performances or meetings or?
Yeah, it's got 11-foot ceilings or something. It's not a bad space. It's got some windows, access to a bathroom. So, yeah, right. The park. You have to walk or ride your bike.
Understood.
So you have to walk. The point is we're talking.
Connects, right?
We're talking about it for 25 to 50 people max size.
Okay.
But that first run basement where you go up the main stairs and then into the lower level would be. But
not that you might still have like a caterer in the catering kitchen or something like that?
No, not considering that at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
because as Jeff pointed out, it all, right, it's all together, different times of
Right.
traffic and parking during different times of day. Comments and questions on density, number of units, types of uses in the building?
Lower is better. I think that checks all the boxes except economics. I think you'd really have to prove why the 6 extra units are, if that's the number, why that makes the building work better.
I'm not sure that I'm not saying that it does.
Whatever the numbers are.
Yeah, I'm saying that divided by 1,000, it's 30 units, it's great at 30 units. If we have if we have 1,600 square foot units to get to 24, then we have to ask money that isn't gonna happen, for the rent rate. You have to be careful not to blow it up like that. So, we'll have more, but I think I want to stand firm on a maximum of 30, and then stand by, because we'll spend the next 6 weeks paring it down, plan by plan, unit by unit, and submitting that in October.
Other commissioners?
Along with traffic data that can support the difference between the two.
Other commissioners on density, number of units, types of uses? And I'll wait till Councilman gets back to you, obviously.
All right.
Oh, hey,
Hey.
we're talking about density, number of units, types of units. I'm sorry, types of uses. Were you here for the comment that there may be a small community space preserved in the lower level?
That would be
there's
great.
Consideration of that.
I think that would be great and in alignment with what some of the public has been asking for.
Yeah, in alignment with some of the other conversations that we've had about zoning changes. And again, the best equivalents to this that I can think of, people might have other examples, was at Taft, which bordered 8 miles. So very different neighborhood in terms of ingress, egress, parking,
Well, I think
transit access, pushing that number of units down was an important part of the conversation. Pushing the number of units down and pushing the parking internal to the site was a really important of the conversation to keep that a livable neighborhood for single-family homes
I agree.
that may already be parking on the street.
And I think it links back into part of the discussion, and I'd like for us to get back there at some point, about we spent a lot of time on what feels like site plan issues, and it's all important. I've really enjoyed this presentations today. But, there are components to what we need to do that we feel would validate a conditional rezoning, public good being one of them, of course. And that's the kind of thing that I want to, at some point, when it's appropriate, we go back and link to, because I think one of our objectives today was, for discussion purposes, to have that discussion that do we meet criteria, or do we approach to meet criteria for conditional rezoning, right?
I haven't gotten there yet, but yes.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, to your point of what you were asking me, I think that's a critical piece of that button. You're doing great. I wasn't saying we got it there or not.
So density and number of units and types of uses is also related to questions around infrastructure, around drainage, around water usage. On page 4, there's an assertion that the demand will actually decrease from the previous use. And I just wanted you to talk to us a little bit about, because this is one of the things where, like, I want to believe the data rather than my gut, and my gut tells me, oh my God, that's not possible. What supports that assertion? Is there an engineering study? How do you estimate what's coming out of that building?
In terms of water, sewer, electric,
Precisely.
emergency services and so on?
All of the infrastructure concerns that you're hearing from an aging city, it's sort of an aging city infrastructure and an increasing rainfall runoff, sort of climate situation, so.
Okay. Knowing that's a question that does have a quantifiable answer between single family,
Right.
30 units, of multifamily and church/assembly, we can include that documentation.
Okay, that'll be very important
Okay.
to me, in terms of this conversation around, neighborhood impact, right? One of the biggest dots that we saw on Justin's slide was neighborhood impact. There's a lot of things that fall under neighborhood impact, but when I think of my neighborhood, I think, is my sewer backing up? Is my garbage getting picked up? Can I park? Is it loud? Right? Like, what, some of these infrastructure concerns that are, I'm sure, Dan's bread and butter on the city council.
We'll bring that documentation from our data, from our engineers, get it to the city in advance so that your administration and engineering departments can either agree with it, not agree with it, comply with it, accept it, whichever.
Okay.
And then we can have that ready for discussion.
Okay. Other comments on infrastructure?
In terms
Neighbor?
of, community space reserved underneath the larger sanctuary, even if it's R3, would, and maybe this is a question for Justin, would there be uses that are restricted in that zoning?
Right. Things that are typical to an R3, like if this were apartment complex, so like a conference room, small gathering space, things like that would be allowed, but, a auditorium, small auditorium or something like that, wouldn't be typical. Though, commercial kitchen probably shared by a bunch of folks, those things, I don't know that those would really be permitted. They're kind of accessory to the primary use, so it just depends what's proposed. But I would lean towards more on the safer side in that a small shared room, office type.
Community centers.
Community center.
Schools, these are permitted in our zones, so.
Yes, so something like that rather than, I don't know, I'm just thinking of bigger community uses.
It's a very large space down there.
Yeah.
It's huge, yeah.
I mean, if that's desired, then we could talk about parking and we could talk about, would that need a variance or not? Since this is a rezoning, it's not a PUD, we'd have to get into those finer details, but, yeah, so I would shy away from some of the bigger uses unless there's room to fit more parking on or there's a parking waiver considered.
What's on the table right now is a room that is big enough for one of the residents to sign up for and have a gathering slightly bigger than they can have inside their own living room.
Like a public meeting about the reuse of a church?
Like.
I'm being serious.
No.
Those are the types of things that, increasingly we're seeing demand at our community center that's hard for us to fill, with neighborhood groups and, people who want to have, sort of conversations about new developments. So I wasn't.
And we're not implying that whole basement or that whole lowest level. We're implying a birthday party for somebody's grandchild and his or her 6 friends type of thing.
Next on my list is preservation of building features. The rose window, the round,
It's not going anywhere.
the stained glass of it. What stained glass is staying and what's going? Maybe we should
Stained
start.
glass
Maybe we should
inside
stay
of
there.
units, so everything on the north side of the main new sanctuary
Okay,
is coming out,
because that's now someone's
kitchen,
bedroom window, kitchen window. Okay.
and that's it. All the other windows will probably be replaced, all to match up with the kind of colonial style, thin mutton bar, black aluminum steel look throughout the building.
The slate roof, I was glad to hear you say that you
In good
got
shape.
good news about it, because I know
Yeah.
they put many wheelbarrows full of money into that slate roof, not too long ago. So in terms of preservation of the building, and I think I mentioned this last time, I appreciate the elevations that you shared, but when it might come to a condition related to zoning, some type of clarity around a process of evaluating that building envelope, and how it will be determined which key features can stay or go, if there's a window that needs to be rebuilt, what stained glass stays, how, intrusive new, ductwork's not a good example, but if you've got toilet venting and new stacks and other things coming up through that roof, is that going to have a major impact on the slate? Those are the types
Understood.
of details I'd be looking for, just how you're going to make that plan and how we'll adhere to it.
Okay.
Okay?
And we'll have all of the elevations drawn and noted
Certainly.
in terms of what stays, what goes, what was maybe damaged, getting repaired, what's new, as much as we possibly can for the October submittal.
Anything else on building envelope, historic features, architectural features?
Is there anything beyond repair at the moment you can't save in terms of the exterior that you've identified?
There might be some exterior doors that we can't use because of code restrictions. But there are some loopholes in code for maintaining, reusing a building, so maybe we could save just about everything. It's a commercial use, it's got wide hallways, nice staircases, it's got lots of exits. So we think it's going to be mostly there, to be honest with you. And we're not going to make any representations of every piece of the interior that might be able to hang out, but I'll be honest with you, the main circulation paths and things are in the right place, so.
Let us talk about rezoning criteria. And you walked through some of these starting on page 3 of the letter that was in the packet. You talked about the master land use plan, in the transportation and mobility, as well as the open space section. I've already sort of posed the question to the commission about green space versus parking. I see that as kind of a master plan conflict area where we may need to give direction, rather than expecting someone to read our minds, but I think we've addressed that parking is the direction, just given this location. Perhaps, in my opinion, meeting the R1 standard would be my parking preference, but I didn't hear a loud chorus behind that. We've talked about, in terms of city services, facilities, and infrastructure, that there would be some significant engineering information that would be presented next time, in terms of stormwater runoff, how things are impacting the electrical grid, how things are impacting the water system. Both in how the water would move inside the building and what would happen to draws outside. In that land use, in rezoning criteria A, consistency with goals, policies of the future land use map of the city of Ferndale. Any other questions or comments, responses to this letter? I see a residential use in a residential district as being compatible. I see, with the master land use plan, I see a different type. We are a vastly majority single-family home community, so a different type of residential is something that is prioritized in the master plan. If there is a small complementary use, people have mentioned a community use or something, that would seem compatible with what our districts currently house, but to have like a coffee shop or a commissary kitchen or something that would have a lot of traffic or strange hours isn't necessarily compatible with most of our districts.
No, it wouldn't be. I think, and this is the tricky wicket of it, not really. We just need to have an honest conversation about what is the improvement of the public good by doing this, right? And is it the community space? Is it the maintaining a residential identity of the neighborhood? Well, I don't, I'm just throwing those things out there, but that's the piece I think we end up circling back to a lot.
Well, public good is certainly emphasized in PUDs, and I think it's really important to talk about in rezonings, but I just want to make sure that we're not, similar to the PUD that has like 12 benefit criteria.
Right.
That you're not thinking, okay.
No, I'm not thinking of that.
You're thinking more broadly, okay.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
just the broader idea of it, yeah.
Just checking.
No, it's good.
Moving on to then, I guess, page 4 and 5. They talk about compatibility with the site's environmental features, physical, geological, hydrological. There's not much change proposed to the features as they currently stand. Compatibility with potential uses, and here I think, Dan, is definitely where we get to this idea of community impact and community benefit, even if those aren't exactly the words.
Sure.
I've seen and heard, I've read in emails and I've heard questions about, will rentals decrease property values? I have very negative reactions to that type of argument personally.
I do too.
Because in my opinion, it's speculative, it is not necessarily evidence supported, and it most often gets brought up when you're talking about subsidized housing. That is not what this is, but that argument, I can just sort of tell the room about neighborhood impact and influence on property values. If you want to talk about traffic and parking and noise influence your parking values, your property values, I could hear that. But just because you've got a change near you, that one's harder for me. Other comments on zoning criteria?
Sure. For part 3 of the rezoning criteria, which talks about density, for example, I know you presented this slide as far as you can fit 19 single-family homes on this parcel on paper, but when you look at the actual site, I am skeptical that many homes could actually physically fit on this site in the way that it is laid out. So to me, without seeing it as a test fit, I'm still a little skeptical of the density that's adding to this particular site. And again, maybe that's taking it down to 24 units or possibly even less, considering you showed 19 single-family homes on that spreadsheet as opposed to 24 or more. So that, to me, is still not jiving with as far as this rezoning criteria is laid out.
In terms of...
Yeah, can you say more about that? I'm not...
Yeah, in terms of asserting that there's a benefit to the building?
I think that this is not necessarily compatible with the surrounding zoning district in that it may be adding too much density to this area, because the way that the site is actually platted, it's not, I find it hard to believe that you could actually fit 19 single-family homes on there and produce the density that your spreadsheet is suggesting.
It'll be part of the package. I can bring it to administration beforehand.
Okay, I'm skeptical. I'm saying, I
Understood.
would love to be proven wrong.
I didn't know what it was either.
Okay.
And the truth is, it wasn't about the density, it was about the instinct
Coverage.
that coverage, runoff,
Yeah.
Impervious surface, population, we're all going to be in favor of doing what we're doing. So density is a bigger word, yes. There's a higher number of units, but it's lower in every other instance of measuring density in our favor, even at 30. So that was all that we brought that to. We were asked by the neighbors for that study. Sure. And it makes total sense that if you think, oh, 12, you're right. 12 definitely is less than 30, but 19 is more than 30. And I'll bring the plat that we have drawn.
Okay.
I can provide it next couple of days.
Thank you.
There were a couple of specific questions about lighting, trash, dumpster, snow. Those would typically be addressed in a site plan review, so I don't expect you to have, it'll be exactly this lighting, but are you thinking tall lights on poles? You're
poles.
thinking a light on the garage that goes on when you pull up?
Probably lights inside of the soffits of the garages on the inside face of the parking lot, and shielded lights on the building to maintain some secure amount in the middle of the parking lot without bleeding off of the property with more than half a foot candle. So
Would non-garage parking spaces be covered like little porticos, or it's open if it's not in a garage?
No, they're open.
Okay. Anyone else have anything? I mean, so really the question, oh, go ahead.
There's also new
Yeah,
light
Commissioner.
coming out from the third
Windows.
story windows.
From the
As you're
windows.
driving, I guess it would be west down West Drayton, and then south down Pinecrest, which would be new to the neighborhood, that high radiating. I think
The
out-
dormers?
Yeah, exactly. The dormers and the balconies. I don't know if that could be shielded.
I don't know. The glow of 20-foot candles inside of a living room coming through a window, I don't even think could be measured, but it would be seen, be visible, but I don't think it could be measured by a passerby in terms of its impact on the ground or on other property.
But we also, right, correct, there'd be some kind of light study in general, because we'd have an ordinance that says the amount, and how bright you can make it.
That is absolutely true, but that
Yeah.
none of those light studies will cover the emission of light through a window of a living room
Yeah,
onto
okay.
the property. It'll be building-based lighting, security lighting, packs, door lights and things like that.
Would it measure like a balcony lighting, if there's exterior lighting on those balconies?
It wouldn't necessarily measure that, but we could limit that. I mean, if that was, let's say you're talking about like if you come out of a patio door and there's these two light bulbs.
Yep.
Just like,
Somebody puts an LED in there that's
right, and
mega powered.
there's no need for that kind of lighting on that kind of balcony. So if that's a concern, certainly easy to restrict from an architect standpoint up front with, sconce lights that are below 36 inches, lighting up the tabletop or the floor only, and then depending on the light that comes through the patio door or the window. But if we want to restrict the balcony lighting from having light bulbs on sconces up high, I'm good with that. That's a good condition.
Another, I guess, topic to consider is backlighting if we're saving stained glass, if backlighting would be agreeable to the community, I don't know. That's something they would want.
The corridors would be required to maintain lights on, behind that stained glass at a low level. 5-foot candles, I think, is the hallway lighting.
So we're through our list. I want to kind of go down the table and see if there are any final questions or comments from the community. Do we start with Debson?
The density and the infrastructure are just two things which you said you're gonna bring some more information to the table that I'm concerned about, so I'm looking forward to seeing more.
I think, I just say that I think this has been enlightening. Thank you very much to everybody for participating in this discussion. I thought it was very good.
Yeah, I guess I'm not having some of the same response to the density issue. I think a lot has been going into the different considerations of, we're talking about greater housing choice, kind of preserving the established character of this neighborhood by maintaining the structure. And, you know, when we're getting into that really small difference between 24 to 30 units on a 2.5 acre parcel, I think we're getting ourselves a little bit in a bind on that, and I just want to maybe pump the brakes on that a little bit. I understand the concerns when it comes to, okay, all the responses that come after that, when it comes to number of parking spaces and fitting that on the lot, but I am not having necessarily the same response to the density issue. I think, as well as the parking. If we're talking about 48 required parking spaces, and they can go up to 10% greater than that without needing any sort of additional approval from the Planning Commission. That's 53 spaces for 60, which would be a 2 space per unit requirement. I know it kind of can strike people the wrong way, but the street is a public space. Every residential single-family house had to have 2 spaces off-street required. In reality, there's a lot more than that based on driveway, garages, and that space on the street is, if not used, it's essentially a space in the community that we are all paying for throughout the community. So I'm not trying to say that there should be a ton of people in an apartment parking on the street. I'm not trying to say that, but I don't have the hesitation of 5 spaces difference in the parking, as well as 5 or 6 units different in the building. I think a lot of thought has been gone into how to make this really fit into the community. And besides just greater housing choice and preserving that established character, I think the locational consideration is pretty strong based on the fact that it's pretty much adjacent to the lower elementary school, less than a mile from the upper elementary school, less than a quarter mile from a major community park, half a mile to Woodward and the businesses there, 0.7 miles down to like Ferndale Foods. This is a really interesting project in the city, and you know, what we could potentially lose versus what is being gained in this. I just wanted to pump the brakes on some of the concerns. For me personally, I know I'm just one voice on the commission, but that's a lot of open space that's being maintained there, and a lot of character that's being preserved. So I just wanted to kind of put that point through there. I am really considerate of the concerns on density, especially locally, but I think, you know, when we're trying to get to very fine differences in just a couple of units and a couple of spaces, some of those impacts are going to be a little bit less and more nuanced than expected.
No, I think I would concur that I think attempting to save this green space in itself, rather than losing it, is community good. But it would be nice going forward to for you guys to outline, I guess, what is above and beyond for the community. I think that's the neighborhood would like to see that. So the second priority would be density. I would prefer to see less. I would welcome the conversation that you propose about proving us wrong. I think that'll be important. I'm glad the city has this in their toolbox to attempt to preserve this building, because it seems the track record has not been the same. So I guess I would welcome a more developed plan.
I'm not hearing, I think go ahead, Brett.
You can respond to that. I just wanted to make sure.
No,
I forgot one thing.
Please, yep.
On the affordable housing ordinance, if there is any sort of incentives that are applied for through the city, that is triggered at 25 units, is that correct? Mm-hmm. So if it's approved up to 30 units, that's not necessarily going to end up as 30 units. But if there are 25 or greater and incentives are considered, I think that's something else that would trigger some real considerations from the master plan and efforts for the city to make sure that there's preservation of affordable housing or creation of affordable housing in the community. So anything we hit over 24, which seems to be a magic number, would potentially be triggering another community benefit.
That's a great point.
That's a good point.
I'm not hearing any strong, and I mean, I don't speak for anyone but myself, but is there anyone who does not want to see this come back with a site plan and a rezoning application? Is there anyone who wants this to stop here? I think the negotiation is ongoing. Having the additional engineering, elevations, architectural, all of that other information that comes with the site plan is going to be really important for nailing down a lot of the questions that keep coming back from neighbors. I mean, and completely understood this is not a site plan review, so you can't tell me where the dumpster is. But it's a really important question when you're the house next to the dumpster, right? So the density, and parking, I'll just say it one more time. Lower density, keep all of the parking at an R1 standard, so 2 spaces per unit inside the development would be my preference. You know, we're thinking about, waivers that may need to be granted by the planning commission, conditions that might be offered by the applicant around the evaluation of and preservation of key architectural features. I know you said that you guys were, would need to consider the question about the steeple and the cross. Those are some of the answers that I'd be looking to have resolved at a next conversation. And I think if it comes back at 30 units and without, some real collaboration with the city on parking and circulation and traffic mitigation, it's going to be hard for me. I don't want that to be the thing that makes me not, figure out a way to use this building. So, but they're really important concerns and a big change in a neighborhood. It is a big change in a neighborhood.
Is any further community engagement proposed on your part as you develop these plans?
They know how to find me, so, I mean, we can, I'm always available.
You're inviting people to contact you, is that what you said?
If they feel free to, and they can work through the administration as well.
All right, any last comments from the commission on this? All right, well, I guess the ball is sort of in your court, and it's, to the group with site control to decide whether you're coming back.
Okay, thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, good discussion, guys.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. What? Not typically, I mean, it wasn't a public hearing, it was just a discussion item. Is there something that hasn't been raised that you wanted to raise, or? Oh, I understand. Yeah, I understand. Typically no, but come on up, yeah. Sorry, state your name and address for the record, please.
Sure, I'm Denise Strack. I live at 838 West Drayton, so I'm about 8 houses down from the church. I just want to say I'm for the adaptive reuse and for the rezoning. The comments that Brett made were right in line with how I believe too. I believe it's way more important to save the church. I believe it's way more important to have mixed types of housing in a community. I don't believe there should be apartment ghettos in cities. I believe there should be mixed types of people, mixed types of incomes, mixed types of choices in all neighborhoods. And, as I walk around the neighborhood, I wished, my dream was that this plan would happen. I've seen it work in other communities. And so when I heard that the church was being considered for apartments, I thought that's just perfect. and I was really thrilled with it. So I just wanted, I know there's a lot of people who don't believe that, and I wanted to make sure that my support was heard. That's all. But thank you for letting me say it.
Thank you. And well, and since you said you missed the beginning, I'm sorry, I didn't see you come in. The potential next step if the applicant decides to move forward with a formal request for rezoning, there will be an update on, there's a city website that has information on it. There's an email list that if you're not already on it, you can join. Just trying to reiterate a little bit of what your next step slide was, Justin, that you would expect potentially in November for this to be back on an agenda.
Right. Yeah, I travel a lot for my job and I work really long hours, so I've been trying to keep up as much as possible on the websites and things like that. So, but thank you.
Thank you.
I'm trying to. Madam Chair, I do apologize.
Last one.
I appreciate all the comments from the commissioners. Thank you. I just wanted to say that when people talk about the difference between 30 and 24, and it's only 6 units, that may be a 20% decrease. But if you think about the infrastructure and water pressure, if there are 24 units, 6 more units is a 25% increase. And I want to just make that very, very clear in terms of the concerns for the community and the water pressure that we have a lack of in Northwest Ferndale. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Alrighty, we are moving on to our site plan review at 2625 Hilton Road. Thank you, everybody. If you haven't shared your email address, please do that with Justin or on the sign-in sheet. Thank you, everybody. Move on to 2625 Hilton Road site plan. This is a building that I think most of us toured this past winter. As we were talking about changes in the M1 district. Thank you again to the building owner for hosting us and is back before us for a conversation about our second potential medical marijuana facility. This one now in M1 rather than M2.
Right. Thank you.
Yep.
I'll just provide a brief overview, and the applicant's obviously here, and they can fill in any blanks and answer any site plan questions. Chair Baker did describe everything pretty well in that this is the second of 3 proposed medical marijuana provisioning centers in the city. This particular proposal is by CLDD LLC, and they're located at 2625 Hilton Road in the M1 district. This site was one of the original 5 medical marijuana facilities under the old city ordinance. That did go through the site plan review process. The special land use process was approved, had building plans approved. What did start work, but as you all know, things changed a bit at the state and with the licensing process. So here they are with a plan that meets, in an application that meets the city's new updated ordinances. And I'm happy to talk more about the city ordinances if there's further backup needed on that. But the site essentially fills an existing building. The western portion of, I'm not sure if, and the applicant can clarify if there is actually separation from the building. That was my initial understanding. So there are 2 different users. The existing user on the west side is a medical warehouse that's been there for a little while now. And so that's completely separate from this proposal. We did our typical site plan review process and then did account for things that the medical marijuana ordinance requires, such as a maximum of 5,000 square feet for the provisioning center specific use. The project did meet off-street parking requirements on site for the provisioning center use as well as the existing medical supply use. So there are there's sort of a main parking area on the south side of the building that was recently updated and will be revised to meet ordinance standards and making sure that the provisioning center parking spaces are closest to that building, which is closest to Hilton. 40 spaces are provided for that provisioning center. 23 spaces are required. The provisioning center is going to be located on the first floor of the building. It's my understanding that, as we saw during some of the commissioner's tour earlier this year that there's an upper level. It's my understanding that the state would really not allow for that to even be occupied. And if it were, it still would meet the parking requirements if, say, an office were in there or something like that. But that sounds like that's not something that we really need to be concerned about at this stage. Again, it's primarily interior improvements, parking lot improvements. The landscape plan does meet generally the ordinance requirements. There's some green belt trees proposed as well as parking trees. Similar to what we discussed a couple of weeks ago, typically we have a lot of existing sites that don't necessarily have a lot of places for greenery and things like that. But so some of the majority of the trees for this plan are proposed to be on the Hilton and west side greenbelt area rather than within the parking lot area. And that's something that we have allowed for previous projects as well, to meet the tree ordinance requirement and landscape requirement. There's not any new exterior lighting proposed to change. If that did happen in the future, that's something that staff would review in a photometric plan. So those are the general highlights. Here to answer any specific questions, but being that the building was worked on initially before with the old ordinance, and it's primarily interior work aside from the parking lot improvements. There wasn't a whole lot to get in depth with. We did have, as always, the engineering team, police, and fire review the site for drive lane clearances and visibility intersections. The building would be required to have a Knox box per fire code. So a lot of people have seen it, but there's, as far as staff goes, as they usually do with site plans. But again, here for any questions you might have, and the applicant's here as well.
Thanks. And just to make sure, this is the first one in a while that we've seen that doesn't have any conditions on motion.
Correct.
In the city's opinion, we've got a clean site plan.
Yes.
Okay. That gets an award, I think, maybe.
Truly.
So welcome. If you want to share, come on up. You want to share a little bit about the site plan, anything you want to share about sort of business updates. And then because I have been in the building, I've got a couple of questions about the site and some of the different spaces in the building, but.
What questions do you have as of right now?
I seem to recall, and what I don't remember is who I was talking about this with, and if it had anything to do with your site. I just know the conversation was in your building when we were on our M1 tour. Is there any environmental remediation that's needed in the warehouse area? There was a conversation about vapor intrusion, but it may not have had anything to do with your building.
No.
I just know we were in your building when we talked about it.
No, there isn't.
So at this time, there isn't any remediation, and that warehouse use is sort of separate from what you're doing?
It is. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Through the chair, as I recall, you had that third level that you were putting your offices in, right?
It was a second level.
Yeah.
And there isn't any plans as of right now. That's a proposed use that we may want to do down the road.
Okay.
But as of right now, there isn't.
The parking lot on the north side, is that, it doesn't look like you need those parking spaces right now.
Do not, no.
So right now, really you're focusing on the parking area on the south side.
We do have
as
adequate
servicing
parking
your
in the main parking lot as of right now.
Got it. Thank you.
That, if I could through the chair, that's for both uses, or that's just for the provisioning center?
I'm sorry, when you say both uses?
The warehouse?
The warehouse?
Yep.
Correct.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, I was going to ask about striping and access in the north side, but I don't think it's included. I think it's excess at this time. Any other questions on site plan? At our last meeting, we were looking at a similar facility in an M2 that had, some sort of questionable choices about where drive lanes were versus where pedestrians were moving versus where, maybe people with mobility issues were moving. This one looks pretty straightforward in terms of where pedestrian from vehicle separation happens. So that some of those circulation questions that we had last time looked pretty clear to me on this one. When do you guys anticipate opening?
If everything goes as planned, we're looking a week after Thanksgiving, so.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's exciting. Yeah, I mean, if there's no questions, this is a
So make a motion.
site plan we've seen before, basically.
I actually have a question.
Please.
For the green belt trees, and this might be for Justin for the city. I think we have, it's showing 150 feet of roadway. I think that's what I'm looking at here. This is getting into our site plan packet. I was just wondering, is this inclusive of both Hilton and Goodrich? And was this just only a certain portion of one of those?
That's a good question. Is it just Hilton because the address is on Hilton?
Right, all the building improvements really were on Hilton, so that's what we focused on. It's kind of what we've done in the past for existing sites.
Okay.
But they did, because they ran out of essentially green space to put all the required trees on, we did say, it would be acceptable on Goodrich, but.
My understanding with the trees required within a parking lot based on number of spaces is that those would be interior to the parking lot to kind of break up the sea of pavement, kind of provide some additional water quality benefits that way, and shading of the pavement, shading of the cars, that sort of thing. So was there any discussion about moving those into the parking lot, since we are at an excess of parking?
We didn't discuss that. We've typically allowed, I understand the intent of the parking tree ordinance, and we have required that in the past on certain sites that are sort of, like shops at Camborne kind of comes into mind. Some of the new, fresh and, clean sites that have been scraped, but, if that's something the planning commission is interested in, the applicant can let you know the feasibility of that, but that's not something we've really required in the past. For at least I should say for existing, mostly interior improvements.
Yeah. Will the parking lot has already been improved, or will be improved?
Has already been improved, will be restriped to
Okay.
match this layout. I don't know that anything's changing on the northern parking lot because it's not really part of this, but on the northeast corner.
The northeast lot, the only thing that we may do to that is just restripe it when the main lot is striped as well.
And the south lot, or southwest lot, that is being restriped or repaved or anything like that? Or has that already been improved as well?
Southwest lot.
The lot just south of the building?
On Goodrich?
That's been improved as well, but it hasn't been striped yet.
Okay.
I think we saw their first site plan 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling that you've been doing some of the improvements and then waiting for laws to happen and then doing
Correct.
some of the improvements.
Correct.
So just for point of clarification, Justin, the 150 feet of frontage, is that just trying to be representative of only the portion of the site that's being used for this use? Because I see that on Hilton it's 300 feet, and on Goodrich it's approximately 175 feet.
It was only supposed to be focused on that core area in front of the provisioning center.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a question that has come up a couple times. Brent, would it be helpful, since I know this is something that Erin focuses on, to have her, how can we provide a little bit more clarity around how some of these requirements are interpreted by the city? So if there's 300 linear feet of Hilton frontage, how did the 150 decision get made? And just because Commissioner Gurings, we've had this exchange a couple times, and I don't know if maybe it's a little presentation Erin can give about how things are interpreted, or if she's already working on some updates.
It's not really a landscape plan ordinance update. It's just been how, being an old city with a lot of existing buildings, there's really not, unless you have a Ferndale house or something like that, where there's a major change brand-new building being made, or in Drayton's case, a major change to an existing building, that's what, I mean, the full-on landscape ordinance requirements have typically came in when you have to apply for a brand-new site plan that is encompassing the full building. So it's been more focused on specific improvements to, because we do have a lot of multi-tenant buildings. So that's where that's been the interpretation in the past on this.
But even just that decision that it's 150 feet versus, 300, is that?
I'd have to zoom in again, I guess, on that specific portion of the building, but.
I don't want to gloss over it just because I feel like we've talked about
Yeah,
it
no, and, I mean, part of,
a couple of times, greening.
I don't want to be kind of a sore thumb whenever we kind of bring these up, but it's.
I don't want you to feel like one,
you know,
which is
it's,
why I want to pursue it a little bit.
I really would like to catch parking lots before the improvements are made. The intent of that is to put those trees in a parking lot for those purposes. And there can be struggles, like on Hilton Road, there are power lines. So the trees, maybe, I'm just looking at the species of trees of red maple, perhaps a different tree that's a little bit small, like more of a medium tree, slower growing, would be more beneficial there. And then, other trees could be much more appropriate for interior to a parking lot if those tree wells had been part of a parking lot redesign. And there is the space, there are these considerations. I think it makes sense to have them over on Goodrich. There's the space there. There is no power line that I saw, at least. So just kind of trying to understand all the decisions that are made and then how we can really structure these to just kind of be the default position and whenever a plan comes through. Because there's always, what do we do with these trees kind of after the fact? And this is the time when we can impact that.
Yeah, I mean, I can just speak for this plan, the building being 100 feet long, and essentially the parking area for the provisioning center added up to around 150, so that's where we landed. But if the commission's direction is to not do that in the future and include the entire building, we can do that. But that's just how this has been interpreted in the past in trying to get previously vacant buildings in action, I guess.
You don't have like perfectly square buildings on parcels that all match?
That'd be boring.
Well, and the warehouse is currently occupied, correct? Right. Yeah, so it makes sense to me.
Yeah, okay. And we can provide further detail, like when this comes up again in staff reports, when we have these reuses going forward, that's perfectly okay with me.
Is that portion north of the north parking lot that's now green space, is that correct? Is that, it's kind of shown off to the, I guess it's not on the site plan, I was looking at the, I was looking at the county gateway, so you can ignore that.
Okay.
All right, if there's any other questions or comments on the site plan?
Justin, I do have a couple if questions, I
Thank
guess. Knowing that a lot's happening in the immediate neighborhood. If a childcare nursery or educational moved within 500 feet and then they wanted to expand, would they be restricted?
Potentially, yes, if that ordinance stays in place, yes. So there would be restrictions for schools and daycare facilities to locate near here or expand near here, and churches, I believe, too, yeah.
Okay, that's it.
Other questions? Looking for questions or a motion?
I'm going to make a motion in the matter of 2625 Hilton Road. The Planning Commission approved the site plan based on plans dated received by the Planning Department on September 10th, 2018, with the following findings as listed in the packet.
Support.
Thank you. That was a motion made by Commissioner Brazen with a second by Councilman Martin. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right.
Do we have to take an action on the parking? I know this is kind of what got back to the other discussion we had on the other side as well, but we're in excess of the 10% over the maximum. But there is an existing use and.
Right, yeah, if it were a brand new use or something like that, I would say yes, but because there's an existing tenant, it's an existing situation, I wouldn't, but.
Would you like to propose an amendment to the motion?
Well, I guess I'm just trying to get clarification if that's something that's required. It's another one where it's part of a larger site. There is an upstairs that could be used for something else. There is the warehouse, so. If the city stance is that it's something that's not needed.
I would say it's not needed. It hasn't been in the past. I don't think it's something we would need to tackle on this. It'd be, I'm just trying to think of other situations where it would come into play and it hasn't been done that way in the past. Not that that's my answer for everything.
Where there was an excess, you mean?
Right.
Yeah.
When there's existing situations, I think that's when you would not have to do that.
So just making sure that that becomes part of the discussion of any future changes with parking, that is clearly identified.
That would have, yes, that would have to be. If someone submitted a zoning determination request for a different type of use, that's when we would reopen, yeah.
I was thinking more in the lines of, once we get to administrative items, we'll talk about it then, but
Okay.
for larger discussions about parking in the city, not for this site.
Any other discussion on the motion? I just realized, I'm sorry. I didn't ask if there was anyone in the audience who had anything to share, and we're not debating whether or not there should be medical marijuana in Ferndale. That debate is closed. But if there was anyone who had questions or comments on the site plan, I should have asked that first thing. I apologize. All right. Come on, Scott. You want it? No? All right. All right, then our roll call vote. Thank you. I tell people to hold their comments.
Commissioner
Don't forget to
Zazar. Yes. Casio.
Yes.
Gerink.
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
Yeah, let's see, Rock.
Abstain.
Pardon?
Abstain.
Okay. Wait a second. Brazen.
Yes.
Baker.
Yes. So with 6 votes, that motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good night, guys.
I don't want to say we hope we don't see you again. That's not what I mean, but I'm pleased you are moving toward opening. Congratulations. Yes. You've spent a lot of time with us. Thank you. All right, we will move to
Oh, sure.
discussion item. This is item number 6A. Rezoning discussion, 3315 and 3331 McDowell. These are single-family residential homes in an R1 district, and we have a discussion item tonight about potentially intensifying the use at those addresses.
Thanks. So I will try to be brief, as the applicant put together a pretty thorough packet that they can provide more details on, but we are, the applicant's requesting a discussion on behalf of Wolverine Private Equity 3. Few sites in play on McDowell Street. They're currently zoned R1. There are 2 single-family homes there and a vacant parcel with some existing landscaping and trees. The sites surrounded to them, to the west, are zoned mixed-use 2, and pretty much R1 surrounded the rest of the site. The sites that are just to the north that are closest to the 696 Service Drive 10 Mile, those are zoned R3, single/multiple family residential. So the applicant kind of met with staff and said, I'm noticing what's going on in Hilton. I'm noticing the zoning on 10 Mile Road, and I'm just outside of that area. They mentioned they had noticed some of the transitions discussed in the master plan and some of the recent projects on how how could this project transition to some of the other sites nearby, and how does it fit in with what's existing on the street there? So we talked about the feasibility of potentially rezoning the site to either R2 or R3. There's a few concepts that were in the packet to allow for townhomes or some multifamily units. In looking at the master plan, the future land use map calls for traditional residential, which, you know, we've talked about in the past, is as a guide, really typically corresponds with the R1 zoning, but the description for traditional residential does list low-density housing types such as townhomes and duplex as being potentially compatible with housing types. I think that the Planning Commission and City Council suggested that language be in the master plan, because we did not totally, I think, address transitions in land use, particularly with housing in the master plan, nor did we have the time. So that was discussed with the applicants as well. So if this concept plan would be received favorably by the Planning Commission, then this would require rezoning, public hearing notice to all the residents surrounding it, and a full site plan would be part of the staff review. But wanted to at least get the applicants here to discuss this, see if this is a viable option, and see if this aligns with the vision that was discussed for this district, being nearby Hilton, being nearby some R3, and in considering the existing neighborhood compatibility as well. So,
Thank
the
you.
applicants want to.
We'll welcome the applicants to
Great.
come on up. Our second rezoning related discussion of the evening. I see a whole audience waiting.
I think I need medical marijuana.
They just walked out, man.
Welcome.
Oh yeah. So you can use either the arrows or.
I'll probably use the arrows. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Dorian Moore with Archive Design Studio in Detroit. We are the architects and planners for the McDowell Street development, representing Wolverine Private Equity 3. And I just want to take you through our thinking on this development site and the reason why we came up with the different scenarios that we've developed that you have either in your packets or you'll see on the screens here tonight. So the way we looked at this situation is that, as Justin had mentioned, that this is a transitional area from areas to the north, which are higher density, and areas to the west, which are higher density. And there's an opportunity here for us and for the city to have a display project that looks at what makes up that transition as far as housing is concerned. How can we take a look at sites and come up with a higher use for the site, but also make a transition from what is on the west, a mixed use area, and transition over to the more residential area. And typically, quite often in urban areas, when you come off of the main streets and the main intersections, there's usually that one block depth or that one site depth where the transition happens from a more commercial environment to a more multifamily environment, and then you transition into the single-family residential area. And so the more or less the first street in or the first sites in typically become the multifamily areas. And what we are suggesting in our scenarios for this site is to look at something on the scale of a townhouses as a transitional example in moving us from mixed use to what I would consider medium density housing and into the low density residential housing, going from west to east. And then going from north to south, the area at I-96 is, I think, currently zoned R3, which is a higher density, and we would envision in the future matching that density coming down McDowell Street. And so this could become an example of exactly how to do that. When we look at the site specifically, as you know, there are three lots on the site that are 40 feet wide. What we have typically seen in a lot of our projects, and here looking at the zoning that I just mentioned, is the opportunity to take what is a 120-foot wide lot and to take it from 3 parcels to 4 parcels, as the diagram on the right here shows, and thereby being able to increase the density slightly on the site by making 4 30-foot parcels instead of 3 40-foot parcels. And so a slight variation in the urban grid gives us the opportunity to create something that we think could benefit the entire area and be used as an example. So we have 5 scenarios that we've looked at in the area. The first scenario is we have the existing vacant lot, and simply we could come in and build a single-family house on that lot. But again, we were trying to look at the opportunities there from the standpoint of the development team, but also from the standpoint of the city being able to show what the potentials are in these transitional areas. So the 2 concepts that are shown in this image show different approaches to the site. One where we used the 4 30-foot lots to achieve 4 single-family homes, and increasing the density but keeping the general character of the area. And the second scheme shows a townhouse configuration, again with 4 units on the site. But in this case, creating a model here as an example of what can fit into what is right now a mostly single-family street, but introducing a new housing type and a new housing option for people to live in the area. The next set of scenarios looks at a slightly higher density level. Concept D on the left looks at 6 units spread across the site in narrower units with garages in the rear. And actually, I failed to mention that in each of these scenarios, we have precedent images that will be coming up in a couple of slides that illustrate the massing and character of some of these typologies. But in scenario D, we have a series of 6 units of townhouses across the site. And then in scenario E, we have a condition where we would have 8 units that would be stacked flats. So in each of these scenarios, we keep within a 2-story configuration so that we still keep within the general scale and massing of the street, basically 1.5 stories, so that we don't have something that's overpowering, but we are providing an additional example of what can be done with those lots. And so the images on the slide you have before you are just some examples in traditional neighborhoods, specifically on the left side, where you have townhouses adjacent to single family. Traditionally, you can see that in the top image and in the images in the center, and then on the lower left, those are new infill townhouses on a single-family street. And these are Detroit images. On the right side of the slide, at the top, you have images of single-family product on 30-foot lots. These, again, are from projects in Detroit. And then below that, a more medium density. This is an example of the 4 units that will be put on a 120-foot wide lot. And then below that, another couple of examples, the one on the left, a 4-unit that would, again, fit on the 120-foot lot. And then the final unit on the bottom right is an example of a 6-unit development where you have narrower units that are approximately 16 to 18 feet wide, and that would produce the 6 units on the site. And so the purpose of showing these is really to show the variety of examples of what can be done from a scale and massing and articulation standpoint, not specifically a material standpoint, because the character of the area it doesn't necessarily match all of these images. Some of these images, of course, are brick, and the character on McDowell Street is predominantly siding. And so as we moved forward, we would look to something that blended into the character of the area more, but still created a new option for people within the area. And so that's just the overall introduction into our thinking behind it. And I don't know if Scott wants to come up and talk a little bit about the development team and what the thinking was going into the logistics of the project.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I think I know a few of you, and my cold's probably helping me keep it short, so thank you. Chris and I are the principal owners of Overeem Private Equity, so we own over 30 rental properties in the city today. I've been involved in the city of Ferndale since the 90s. We've redone a lot of homes, and I think I know Barb here, and she's worked with me on a lot of redevelopments. So this is something that's a little more substantial, so we decided to engage Archive DS. We've owned 3331 McDowell for about 3 years. That house had been somewhat renovated, but we still put more money in. I would say our typical resident today is college-educated, young professionals, couples, individuals. We probably, most of our properties are towards the top end of the rental market. We have a lot of nicely renovated homes with kitchens and real wood floors, nice tiles. Again, if you ask around, I think we can have some testament to the quality of the developments that we do. We've done a couple of new developments. Chris has a background as a legal attorney. I've been a banker for 25 years in construction lending, so we both work in real estate. Construction costs are really the challenge today. We did get a new development done on Marshall, mixed use, a couple of years ago. It's a bit of work, and given what's going on in the street and the economics, I've got a tenant in that single-family house in the front half of the property that isn't in a position to move. So these development opportunities on single-family lots in some of these rezoned areas in the city are a bit of work just to sort of figure out how to acquire the properties and then work with tenants. So this is why we wanted to engage Archive DS to just bring something in front of the Planning Commission to talk about our thoughts. I was very familiar with the mixed-use live-work development on Hilton when it was built before the downturn. In R3, it's actually 2 lots. The one lot was never split. So we just bought it a couple of months ago, so that would be we've got to split it anyway, whether we split it into 2 40-foot lots or do it in tandem with the 3331 McDowell property and do something that's a little more impactful for the neighborhood. And I think the last comment I would make is if you look at McDowell and some of those streets coming off the service drive, the rezoning to R3 years ago as part of the plan process, I think the thought process then was that some of those homes have more limited value because they're on the service drive. And I think a lot of the homes in this neighborhood, they're very, very old, functionally obsolete, small footprints. The one that we bought at 3315 McDowell is probably about 30% lot coverage on its half of the lot. And it's the same with the other property. Most of these houses don't have garages anymore. They're literally, some of them are probably Sears kit homes. So it's an area of the city that I could see some real development opportunities. The challenge, of course, is trying to work with the city thoughtfully to figure out how to do it. We own, again, many properties that are kind of in a similar condition that are adjacent to mixed use or maybe in a mixed use district. So we are looking at doing more development. We've got the capacity to do it, and we're going to work with some architects to try to work with the city to see what we can build and what's economically feasible. So thank you.
Quick question before you sit down,
Yeah,
Scott.
yeah.
Are you thinking that the new, and I might have missed this, are you thinking that the new, whatever happens, whether it's a couple houses or some multifamily units, Are they for sale or for rent?
So that's TBD. I would say that it's just, you don't see very often in Ferndale or any of the inner suburban cities, tearing down a house to build a house doesn't really make economic sense. I think in Ferndale, if you take a look at the Wilson district or Taft, the lot costs to get those lot costs or per unit land costs down to $10,000, $20,000. That's kind of what it takes to make these projects viable. So, we would probably just do one for sale development if it had to be a, simple lot split of 3315. We're trying to do something more interesting. We are interested in staying invested in the city. We're younger guys. Chris lives in Royal Oak, and I'm just up the road and still involved in Ferndale, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, hey, welcome.
I'll just introduce myself.
Yeah.
So my name is Chris Maso. I'm an attorney
Welcome.
at Dickinson, Wright, and Troy. And, we spent a lot of time in this community and nearby, and just looking to do something that we think works for everybody and helps the city out.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Scott. All right. So we have a lot of information in front of us. A lot of sort of interesting urban treatments in what is currently a very suburban feeling neighborhood. A neighborhood that, in my observation, is, between Woodward Heights and 10 Mile and Hilton and, the Hazel Park border, almost exclusively, if not exclusively, single-family homes. I didn't even see a duplex. So I'm interested, it's not exactly an edge, but it's about as close to an edge as you can get. On this property or this side of the street or this block or however we want to think about it. Sort of interested in thoughts from the commission about how this might fit with the master plan, how, edge R1 districts like this should be thought about.
Through the chair, I appreciate all the options and all the time that was spent on developing this. Being on that side of the neighborhood, my first gut impression of it is I'm more comfortable with some of the options that have 4 or 6, like have garages, have parking. I get a little nervous when we get into the higher density. It is further outside the R3 zoning. It is kind of tucked in that R1 zoning. I guess, can you, for the options, concept D and E, can you talk a little bit more about parking and what you envision for that? It makes me nervous if we're relying on street parking, and I know that, you've got an amount of street parking that's provided for these particular addresses, but just once you start to get past, 4 units, if it's 12, so 8 to 12 spots, once you pass 12, it kind of, tell me a little bit more.
In each of the scenarios, we're counting on on-site parking. For instance, in scenario D, of course, you can see those are the garages that are located behind, so that's how the parking is handled. In scenario E, the parking is what we would call tuck-under parking, so that roughly half, maybe a third of the ground floor is rear parking in a parking garage, and then the front part is a living space, and the upper portion is more of the living space for the house. So in each of the scenarios, that's what you get. Even in B and C, it's the same way. So they all incorporate housing. I'm sorry, parking.
So you'd get one garage space per?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And they're based on some prototypes that we've actually done. The projects on the right side of this image are all projects that we've completed, which relatively closely match, at least from a site plan standpoint, the layouts that we're showing.
We get a lot of questions about density and parking. We've had a lot of projects more on the west side of Ferndale. I don't know the turnout from the east side of Ferndale for these projects. I know that I have that comfort level for that 4 to 6 unit versus the 8 and above. And that's just my quick first impression on it.
Yeah, we always like to think that for better or worse, parking drives a lot of development. And so if you can solve the parking, then you can solve the development. Because no matter what, especially in residential situations, you don't want to necessarily depend on street parking because people get a little bit nervous. I live in an area where I have a garage, but it's off of an alley that we can't really access all the time. And so we always have problems out front. So I understand that, and so we try to do that in all of our projects.
Thank you, but Justin's right. It's a very clear and concise presentation.
The single curb cut, Deb, is that, I found it to be one of the sort of like appealing things, like, oh, a lot of units, one curb cut. It's certainly very different than the rest of the neighborhood, but is that a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Just thinking about parking and circulation.
I don't mind that it's just one curb cut. I appreciate that there's a front yard, or appears, that you've got that same character as you'd have in the homes across the street or adjacent to. Architecturally, the pictures that are presented, I think, are also within the character of the neighborhood. They're starter homes, and it would probably be something that would still be accepted in that area. Yeah, I think if the parking piece of it is addressed within the site, I know that street parking is available, but like you said, having that opportunity to keep that all on the site, then we always, when we come up with the multiple family housing options, then the question is, so you have the kid's birthday party, where does everyone park, and where are you having that outdoor gathering or party, or, where's the dog, where do you take the dog, that kind of thing. So I think if we talk more about one of these options and it's further developed, those are the kinds of questions that you're going to get.
Yep.
Commissioner Azar, anything? I'll just kind of go down the row, I guess.
No, just, I was thinking about the single entry driveway, but it's, scale-wise, it's really narrow. So, I mean, functionally, does it really work to have a single width? Or is it single width, or are you actually able to get two-way?
Technically, it would be single width, but I think the way that we look at it is that the amount of units that you have and the likelihood that you'll have, multiple people coming out at one time, I think is relatively rare, especially when you're at the 4-unit and even at the 6-unit level. Now, if we tried to keep within available setbacks, in the 6-unit option, we've got 12 on each side. I mean, if there's flexibility in the site planning phase, we could probably adjust that to get a specifically two-way in and out entrance. But right now, we try to stay within what we thought would be the side setbacks for a combined lot situation.
Sure. So I personally am leaning towards the denser options here. Something that Justin mentioned early on in the presentation was that when we were looking at the master plan, we kind of didn't take the time, because there wasn't enough time, to look at these urban gradients in a lot of different parts of the city. And I think this sharp edge, it really is an edge to me, of mixed use to R1 needs to be softened. And I think that this to zone McDowell on the west side, R3, I think it does begin to bring down that scale of mixed use to single-family detached homes. So I think this is a good fit. I would like to see how that fits from a height perspective. I know you mentioned that this would be kind of keeping in the same height of the homes in the district.
Yeah, relatively, but I think a lot of them are 1.5 stories across the street, I
Sure.
think.
Okay, so, but this might be 2 stories, so
2
it's
stories, yes.
potentially something that could be built in the district, could be that height. I do like so from a philosophical standpoint, I think it makes a lot of sense. You know, the parcel to the north being R1, I mean, I could even see that being rezoned to R3 in the future as well.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, that makes me a little nervous just because it becomes a pocket there, but I really see that whole side of the street really wanting to be R3, especially since it's already R3 along the highway there. One shared lane of traffic in and out worries me at that north location. If I understood you correctly, a car could be coming right at you and you couldn't get around. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, if we, I think like I said, if we kept the 12-foot setback
Okay.
on the side. So we've got a total, we're showing a total of 24. And once you combine the lots, we would have to either negotiate or whether you have a specific standard as to how we could offset it. If we could do 9 and 15 or split it, we could end up getting a two-way scenario. You know, maybe it's 18 and 6 or something like that.
Okay. So that I think needs to be kind of ironed out a little bit, but I think there's time to do that. I also appreciate all of these options laid out very concisely. The character of the architecture, I think, is also really important in this project, being a buffer between the mixed use and the single-family residential. So I think it needs to speak to what it's facing across the street. So I think that's really important. I don't know that some of the more maybe modern examples that are shown here, or just I don't know if that necessarily fits in the context of what's going on across the street.
I think we would agree, and I think it was really just examples from a scale and articulation standpoint as opposed to material.
Okay,
and
understood. So I think that's just really important, is the context that this is going into. But, you know, I think the density makes sense here, so.
Yeah, I appreciate the vision. I'm also the new guy up here, so I guess I have a question for our fellow commissioners. I guess judging the appetite to achieve that vision kind of parcel by parcel. I know you guys mentioned you have other properties in similar areas. You're probably looking for a repeatable process. That makes me a little nervous doing that over and over. I don't know how we resolve that.
As opposed to sort of a broader rezoning of a side of a street or a street or a district?
To achieve your vision, we'd have to come back, I don't know how many number of times to.
So I think, though, this is the only spot where we have 3 lots in a row. So this really is, it's just to see, I think, about the vision and see if it works. But there's certainly no other properties that we own where we could do this.
Yeah, we've been watching.
Can we, is there another mic or, sorry, yep.
I'm sorry, Kate.
Yep.
Well, we've been watching the service drive, and we own, a property on the end of Troy Street, which is currently mixed use, and we've talked to the neighbors. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to get, a series of properties. So here we have 3, and we thought it made a lot of sense to talk about options. And we understand you've got a decision to make in terms of how to address the zoning, and maybe it's a consideration to do that sort of buffer zone zoning and do an R3. So that's absolutely what we're looking for feedback. We understand it's a consideration for you.
Yeah, again, I appreciate the vision. I'm a little nervous in terms of what it means down the line.
That it's the spot? Commissioner Grink?
Yeah, echo the same thoughts about great presentation. I think there's a great packet there. It's very helpful to understand where you guys are coming from. I don't think I'm saying anything new, so I don't want to get too repetitive, but I do see the benefits of that transition from both the north and the west. But I do have the pause. It is isolating a couple parcels to the north that are R1. It is, okay, so, well, it's within 2 parcels. Well, what if another one's within 4 or 3? And, once this had been changed over to another zoning, then another one to the south, 2 parcels down, is kind of that, where does that all end as far as changing over the whole street versus just doing it a parcel by parcel basis? So if that's something that we want to look at on a larger scale throughout the city, it's not really represented well, I guess, with our zoning. So that process, like you've been mentioning, does give me pause on that. I think the scale being presented is in keeping with the neighborhood, but what can actually go in on an R3 and what you're presenting are 2 different things. And on that higher end of an R3, it becomes a different kind of discussion. And I guess everything else had been more or less touched on there.
If I could just address that, the concern about, inserting this type of density into a row of single family. I think that's the point of the images on the left, is that it's something that traditionally happens in urban neighborhoods. And so I think part of what our next task would have to be would be to show, from an architectural standpoint, the elevation or the front view of that street, showing the compatibility of what we're attempting to do with what already exists. So that would entail the existing street frontage along McDowell as an example, but also showing more examples like we're showing here where it's already been done. And I think part of it is getting people familiar or comfortable with the fact that this is not something that's alien. It's something that happens all over as part of how cities naturally evolve. And so I think that's the important thing that we have to consider. Otherwise, you'll hem yourself in and you won't be able to do anything because you won't be able to take that first step. So I think that's an important thing to consider.
Yeah, and through the chair, that's not the part that really gives pause here. I think you do a really good job of kind of showcasing that, and when we're looking at some of those streets, like Breckenridge and Camborne, that are in an R3 district, that some have transitioned, some have not. I think that's a great point, and it really shows a diverse neighborhood, a neighborhood that's vibrant. I think everything that can be compatible. It's just kind of looking at, from a city's perspective, making sure that we're being clear, fair, and consistent in how we're dealing with that. We have Hilton Road, Livernois, and all of our commercial corridors with a lot of R1 adjacent to some other type of use. And I think that's largely, for me at least, the part that's giving pause is just making sure our process is consistent and clear for those people who have made investments and expectations based upon what is there now and being broadcasted by the city. So fundamentally, the presentation and what you're showing is something I definitely support and stand behind too.
Councilman?
No, great presentation. I concur with what my colleagues have said. There's nothing I can add that it's already been said. So.
Thank you. So I guess the first question that I asked myself as I drove through this neighborhood was, do we rezone just this spot? Right, so kind of the same direction that Commissioners Rock and Greg went, well, why not the whole side of the block? Well, heck, why not everything that backs up to MXT if it's in our, well, oh, wait, maybe not. So the more that I thought about sort of in our grid pattern, these adjacencies, kind of the bigger this question got. And obviously you guys see it too, being in different districts all over. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were staying there when I started rambling. So was there something you wanted to add to Commissioner Grimes'
No, actually,
comment?
I just wanted to be here to answer questions and maybe make a closing statement.
I started rambling with my head down. I apologize.
You've been doing this a long time. You're pretty good.
Didn't you used to, weren't you on the BZA?
I was on the planning commission.
You was on the planning
Years ago.
commission. I was gonna say, you used to sit up here,
Years ago.
sir.
With Chris.
Still here.
Yeah, still here.
Slightly predated me, but.
But I'm not a planner, and that's why, you know, I'm a business
Yeah.
person, and we work on the economics. But I've spent a lot of years. I got my MBA in Michigan, close to Peter Allen. Got to know Mark and Dorian, and, you know, Chris obviously lives and breathes zoning. So, you know, like Kenwood, we did a second-story dormer and did a really nice addition. We knew that's always going to be single-family. But we have selectively bought some of these small houses on bigger lots. You know, this is a deep lot, and it's right behind mixed use. And then when the opportunity came up to buy that house, which sat vacant for years, it's just very difficult to redevelop some of these single-family homes in some of these neighborhoods with the current zoning. So it's, you know, consideration to do something that's economically feasible but beneficial, I think, to the neighborhoods and the community. And we'd absolutely, we're confident that we can work with our realtor who's local and the architects to come up with something that's desirable in the neighborhood. I'd also expect we would do a design charrette, you know, get some feedback from the neighborhood. I think that's always valuable. But the first step is just figuring out the density, I think, and the parking. Yeah.
That's fair, before you devote more sort of time and resources to it. Totally understood. You know, and I think as I was driving through this neighborhood and realizing how different, so I grew up much closer to 9 and Woodward, even though I wasn't ever right downtown, and was used to having some duplexes on the street, maybe some four squares on the street, and then started thinking about, you know, would that type of mix adjacent to Hilton help increase some of the vibrancy along Hilton? Or is Hilton so landlocked and so lacking in parking that it's a way bigger issue than just, you know, it being Ferndale's next little, you know, retail corridor that's about to. And so I get it. I definitely, I see the possibility, but I also see a neighborhood that feels almost cottage-like. And as someone who lives in a house that's like 700 square feet, like I drive through that neighborhood and I go, oh, these look like my house. I'm embarrassed to say that how unfamiliar I was with that little corner, and how quiet it is, how relatively low density it is. They are small houses on big lots, absolutely. And it just feels quiet. And yeah, cottage-like was all I could come up with when I looked at these little houses. That said, the neighborhood, these houses they are older, they are often on slabs or crawls, they are stick-built, nothing lasts forever, right? So these are houses that are often in need of investment and repair and upgrade. If there were something that could help me figure out where this fits in sort of the affordability of that neighborhood, you know, are we building $300,000 single-family homes next door to the subsidized rental, or next door to the $120,000 starter house, which kind of doesn't exist in Ferndale anymore, but, you know, that would be helpful. That's why I asked the rent versus own question, you know, kind of where does it fit in that neighborhood, and are we beginning to push an affordable neighborhood out of an affordability scale by allowing more density? That would be a concern for me. Are we perhaps needing to talk about a conditional rezoning to the point of, if you went to the max, we're talking about something very different than
I actually wanted to
what's
ask a question
proposed?
about that.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking at, we were talking about R3, but I thought in your presentation it mentioned R2 or R3.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering if R2 would allow you to build what you're proposing here, let's say Scheme E, the densest proposal.
Justin may know a little bit more, but it's my understanding that R2 would only let you do single-family and duplex. two-family duplex.
So you'd have to do R3 for this, then? Okay.
And I think it's why we had to do R3 at Taft, too. Right. It was the types. I guess the other thing I'd offer in terms of types of housing, things without stairs are really uncommon in Ferndale. Thinking about our aging population and the ability to age in place. If I've got an option of a two-story single-family home, a two-story townhome, or a stacked something, now that starts to get interesting because it offers me a few options that are at grade level and accessible. Again, whether they're for sale or for rent, I mean, that's your business model decision. But if we're looking for something that's desperately needed in Ferndale, it's things on a single level. The townhomes at 9 in Livernois sold in a flash, right? And you've got great stacked options. So do we need more housing types and choices? Yes. Am I typically in favor of more density? Yes. But the thing that I'm just not seeing coming to the planning commission are things that are accessible and things that Ferndale residents who are currently in the 4 or 5 bedroom move up house can age into so that we can sell that 4 or 5 bedroom house rather than build a new one. So as a challenge to archive DS, I guess that would be kind of my question is, as we think about how you build an age diverse community as well as an income diverse community, because this would certainly introduce a new income level.
I guess the question I would ask it as we start to develop things is the housing type that you're speaking of, I think already exists, right? The one level option is there. Those just need to be refurbished.
Well, or your, limited steps option, like the 2 houses you're taking down. So, right, so you've got single story with a couple entrance steps, which is very different than all my bedrooms are upstairs.
Right.
So, whether it has to be concept E to be stacked, or if it could be duplexes, something a little bit less dense, but a different use of the site, and some creative subdivisions. I would be really interested in seeing a firm with your brain power and firepower, like, give me something that has an age in place component, because it's just not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing Roberts and Brothers building, 5 bedroom family homes. I've got 5 bedroom family homes, like Grandma and Grandpa are just still in them, and I don't have anywhere else to put them. So I'm not saying absolutely no. I'm saying I would want to see conditions that would ensure compatibility with the neighborhood rather than an infill and missing middle type and size as opposed to just a straight R3.
Okay.
Yeah, so thank you. This is the feedback we need. What we're hearing is some support and rationale for a higher density submittal. Realistically, because honestly, your comments about the access and parking, I mean, those play to the market as well. You don't want a super tight corner where just people aren't really excited about it. But I would think that the rental range would be $1,400 a foot. $1,400 a unit. That's not San Francisco.
No, in San Francisco.
I do work nationally, and it's really interesting because I work in Austin, Texas, and San Francisco, and just the the challenges those communities face are staggering. So to your point about affordability, we still own some pretty affordable homes, but the reality is most of the demand, almost all of it, is from younger folks in Ferndale. So I don't think these existing homes, they're just not really viable options to be renovated. Some of the small homes that have been well kept can be redone nicely, but I mean, you're talking about better access for bathrooms. I mean, the bathroom in this 3331 is your typical, 7 foot wide by 6 foot. It's barely got room between the toilet and the tub. So when you try to build something new, it'll be market driven, and we can certainly talk about age in place. But I don't think for the scale of our development, here on McDowell, that's, you know, a market option. I think if we sold these units, if we got higher density, maybe it's, you know, smaller units at 240. If we had to do just one home, we might sell one home at 280, 290. If it's rental, it's, depending on the number of units and what it costs us to build, it's 12 to 1,400 a month, which is in line. Our house on Kenwood, which is very nice, to 3-bedroom with 2 bathrooms and a garage, is at 1,400 a month, so. But yeah, we understand all those considerations. We just think this site with these small homes that honestly are in rough shape. I mean, the McDowell house, we, you know, have it looking nice. The other one will take a lot of work to rehab. So we wanted to fully discuss, you know, a higher density development option that would be feasible and frankly could kick off other activity. I just think if you get, you know, if the Planning Commission in particular can give some guidance on how these projects could work, and, you know, you're already looking at it on Livernois, and Marshall hasn't really had any new activity yet. That's, you know, Troy Street's mixed use. It's about being able to get the properties and then try to deal with the zoning. So in this instance, we've got, you know, 120 feet, could be 4 lots. Maybe we can do something interesting with townhomes, so.
You want a church?
Well, yeah, the church is interesting. Of course, you know, I was at Scott Galliboy's wedding at that church, and I went to that church for a lot of years, so it's an interesting one. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Are there any other final comments or questions from the commission? Justin, do you feel that you've gotten the direction from the commission to kind of help you?
Sort of.
Help you help the applicant, or?
I mean,
I think we raised a few giant questions rather than giving you really clear direction.
but also things that we're kind of looking at with that multifamily ordinance and the 2-family ordinance that are being tied in with. We've been mostly talking about the mixed-use districts, but it really applies here too. And the thing that I needed to keep reminding myself too is that R3 does still permit single family.
Yes.
And I don't know if that was part of our maybe steps towards thinking about transition. So I just wanted to put that reminder out there because sometimes I do forget that as well. But so I heard, you know, density could be an issue. Transition, do we rezone just these sites? Do we consider rezoning that street? But where do you stop?
I honestly think that it is laid out pretty well on the zoning map where it would stop.
Yeah.
But if you have the zoning map right here.
Oh,
hold on.
you know what?
I'll pull it up in my presentation. In a minute. There's a portion which you could, on the page you were just on where it zooms in, where you can see all of those properties turning at, I think, Brickley.
Mm-hmm.
That to me makes sense as a transition.
Yeah.
Once the roads start going the other direction, I mean, then you lose that ability to have a clear gradient, so.
Yeah. And that's kind of where, I think that's a little bit how we did Bermuda last January, or however long ago that was too. So that's initially what I was thinking, but yeah, so I think that's clearer. That's probably more clear than some of the other direction, but I'm hearing missing middle, age in place type of units would be preferable. Also considering the architectural compatibility with, you know, obviously some of those homes are a little bit more cottage type, but somehow incorporating something that
There's
fits.
some contemporary renovations happening even on that block. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, we may come back with more questions before there's a full application, maybe after testing some ideas and seeing what the ordinance allows, because I know there could be some setback considerations we have to make too, because you do have to kind of tie in with the existing setbacks, and some of those homes are set back pretty far as well. But I think I've got enough to get started. Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for the coffee.
No problem.
Yeah, I'd come say hello and shake your hand, but I'm not going. Not going to. I'm just going to wish you well and feel better soon, sir. All right. Administrative items. So I made a note that Commissioner Goring has a couple things. Did you have anything to update us on?
no updates for right now, other than Aaron and Jordan will be leading the next meeting. I'll be out of town.
I thought you said leaving.
No. There's too much to do.
They're out. No one has a spot.
There's too much to do, so couldn't
You
leave.
said they were leaving the next.
No, I'll just be out of town. But so that, and then as far as schedule goes for the rest of the year, I think we already did discuss moving November to the week earlier, whatever date that is. My mind's escaping me on that right now. But December was still kind of a question, and whether we can actually fit 2 meetings in or not. My sense is that we push the second meeting up a week and potentially just, I would say, cancel the first meeting of the month. And then if there's something special comes around that we feel like we do need to meet early on, we could do that. So I
Will
don't
you
know.
send around proposed date changes
Yeah.
and even just a date hold?
Absolutely.
So that we can see what people's travel schedules are and
Yep.
Well, and I think too, depending upon the, this is just my feeling, depending upon the project, we may need to meet something off schedule, because I don't want to hold up some of these things. The longer they're out there,
Right.
the worse it's going to get.
Right.
So,
Agreed.
That's one way to put it.
notice I didn't name the project.
I also, speaking of people leaving, so Commissioner Farr, it sounds like is going to be available for our next meeting.
Correct.
Hasn't moved yet and is available, which is great. And Justin and I had a brief conversation about new commissioners. You know, we need someone to take Commissioner Farr's spot, and I would just encourage the planning commission. So, I mean, Josh is an attorney. We don't have to do a one-for-one swap by any means. But if you have a name that you would like to put forward, or a friend or neighbor or colleague who you would like to encourage to apply or to talk to Justin about it, I would just encourage you to make that connection so we can get a little bit of a pipeline built. We had a really deep pipeline, and y'all are all on here now. So rebuilding that bunch a little bit, I think it's going to be important. Brett?
Well, there was just a comment to, when you're talking about anything with landscaping and parking, I know you're already looking at some of those things, just to make a note of whenever those are coming up. Because there's things we're not necessarily thinking of until you get into the middle of a site plan like that. It's like, oh, it has facing on 2 different streets, and it's one part of a larger parcel, and one building does have a use in it, but the other one is one that's part of the site plan, but then there's a second story that might be in play later. Like, that's a situation you don't necessarily just think of. But it is one thing that we have to deal with.
We've had it 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, but just making sure that that's part of the process that you're going through already.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other commission items?
Just a question of enforcement, and maybe that's a discussion offline.
Yeah.
But just I know there's really bright new lights at Ferndale Food, which is great. I don't know if that's really how that works with the lighting, and
I
then
haven't seen it. Is it the main sign?
no, the parking lot.
Parking lot.
Oh, I had never noticed.
Well,
It's
if you drive by,
quite
you notice
recent.
it.
There tonight, yeah.
Which I know, I think that was probably a concern about for safety, which I understand why some real improvements were made. I just was quite shocked to walk through there.
And it's quite recent.
Yeah, it's quite recent, so I don't know. That's obviously more on
So you
some
can
of the
see
other
the
process
deep
outside
gaping
of the
holes
planning
in the
commission.
parking lot better.
Yeah, it's outside of the planning
And the
commission,
cars for sale.
obviously, but
But something we can look at.
Yeah.
No new photometric plans were given to me, so that's where we can have. We have in the past for some new projects. There's been a change in lighting, and
and it might just be
doesn't
how
match the
high it is up
plan.
on the pole. You know,
Yeah.
it could be everything's good, just lowering it. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
No, it's
I'm not
it's
even
a
know.
great idea, yeah.
And then
Yeah. If it's not shielded and directed downward, that's an issue.
yeah, and I think there was like a heating and cooling thing on the front of a building somewhere else. So just
On
questions
Livernois?
about the process. Yep.
It's on Livernois. I already asked about that one. The one across from Bubble and Park.
Yeah, that one is on its way to being shielded.
All right.
Nice.
Is there any update on the strike?
Jordan did send an email to the businesses that I can share with the planning commission, but Livernois is one of the projects that is part of the,
Lockout.
I forget the organization, but it's a lockout
lockout,
for the
yeah.
heavy
Lockout.
machinery,
Yeah.
I think, operators. union, and so the state of Michigan actually issued a statement today as well that said Governor Snyder is offering assistance and to basically end the lockout, not necessarily provide assistance to the cities. But MDOT did say that they would provide us with a further update by the end of the week as well.
Just so if anybody's interested, the city of Ferndale sent a letter to the company that's got the project indicating our desire for them to resolve this, and also don't try to bring in any non-union labor, which was on the table at some one point, as I understand. And we got a really snotty letter back, so any good feelings I did have for them is gone. So
okay, I didn't see that, but
yeah. Just saying. That's this week's annoyance.
yeah, I mean, the project was on schedule before this strike, or lockout, I should say. Strike.
Yeah.
But, and so, we were supremely disappointed that, this project was affected by it. Being that it is a state contract, that's one of the levers we're trying to pull is, how can we still get this completed beforehand? And if not, then there's the alternatives we would have to do to bring, have DPW out there essentially, making the road passable. Is that an option? It's not our preferred option, but we want it, residents and businesses are kind of suffering through this, and it's not
I understand my good friend Mayor Faust asks the governor to.
I saw that too.
Yeah, declare a state of emergency.
Yeah.
All right. Any other agenda items? I'm sorry, administrative items?
Through the church, what's on the agenda for October meeting?
October 5th, right now, one potential discussion item, and then possibly some ordinance updates, not public hearings, but here's a hint at shared parking and things like that. So I'm going to talk to Aaron and Jordan and see if they're comfortable with bringing that forward. If not, then the mid-October meeting would be that.
Thanks.
Cool, problem.
All right. Thanks, Rich. Thanks,
Thanks,
Barb.
everybody.
Michelle Adjourn. Thank you very much.
Good job.
Thanks, man.
You gonna turn the speakers?
Yeah, are we still recording?
We are.
Thank you. This would be the time of the city council meeting when I would start accidentally dropping F-bombs into microphones. Yeah, you don't remember that because we weren't on together.
Once he turns them off, we'll be okay.
This would be the time of the council meeting when I would start accidentally dropping Fs into the microphone because I would be worked up and forgetting that it was on. I know we're not done yet. I didn't say it.